In the silence of the desert, a son who was once forgotten stands at the crossroads of faith and destiny, his legacy quietly shaping the world. What if the untold story of Ishmael holds the key to understanding our deepest spiritual connections and the promises that still echo today? Abraham was a man of deep faith, chosen by God to be the father of a great nation. His journey began with a promise that seemed impossible given his age and the barrenness of his wife, Sarah. But God's words were clear. Abraham would be the father of many nations, his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Yet, the years passed, and the promise remained unfulfilled. Sarah, growing desperate and impatient, suggested an alternative, that Abraham take Hagar, her maidservant, and have a child through her. This was a common practice in their time when a woman could not bear children, but the decision was not without its consequences. For Abraham, the promise seemed distant, and the pain of waiting grew heavier with each passing year. The tension between his faith and his growing doubt became palpable. Would God truly fulfill his promise? Could this be the path God intended for him? When Sarah suggested Hagar, Abraham was reluctant, but he ultimately agreed, believing that this was the only way forward. Hagar's pregnancy brought with it a mix of emotions, hope, resentment, and growing tension within the household. Hagar, once a servant, now carried the child of the man she had served. It was a strange and uncomfortable situation. Sarah, despite her initial agreement, began to feel a deep sense of jealousy and resentment toward Hagar. The child she had hoped for was no longer hers, and her relationship with Abraham became strained. She saw Hagar's pregnancy as a reminder of her own inability to conceive, and, in time, Sarah's jealousy began to overshadow her initial decision. Abraham's heart ached with the growing conflict in his home. He had longed for a child, and now, his firstborn son was growing within Hagar. Yet, the love for this child was overshadowed by the animosity between his two wives. Abraham, a man who had trusted in God's promises, was now torn between his faith and his family's turmoil. It was in this moment of tension and uncertainty that God spoke again. The promise would not come through Hagar's son, but through Sarah, who would bear Abraham's true heir. Ishmael, the child born of Hagar, was not the child of the promise, but God's words were clear. He would still be blessed. He would become the father of a great nation. His descendants, too, would be numerous. Abraham's faith, tested and strained by doubt, was reaffirmed in that moment. The promise was still alive, though it would unfold in ways Abraham could never have imagined. Ishmael's birth marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would shape the future of Abraham's lineage and the world itself. Sarah's heart ached with longing, the weight of her infertility growing heavier with each passing year. The promise God had made to Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation seemed impossible without the one thing Sarah could not give him: a child. She had tried to remain hopeful, to trust in the promise, but as the years wore on, frustration and doubt began to take root in her soul. Sarah was not a young woman anymore, and her body, once full of potential, had betrayed her. Her dream of motherhood seemed as distant as the stars Abraham was promised to father. The weight of this unmet desire became unbearable, and it was in this place of desperation that Sarah made the decision. She would offer Hagar, her maidservant, to Abraham. In their time, this was not an unheard-of arrangement. If a wife could not bear children, it was customary for her to offer a servant to her husband, in hopes that the servant would bear the child that would inherit the husband's name. It was a practice rooted in the customs of the time, but one that carried its own complexities. For Sarah, the decision was not born out of cruelty, but out of the hope that perhaps this was the only way for God's promise to be fulfilled. Hagar, on the other hand, was not a willing participant in Sarah's plan. She was a servant, bound by the needs and desires of her mistress. Sarah's words weighed heavily on her heart, and though she didn't resist, a quiet reluctance settled within her. How could she, a servant, bear a child for her mistress, knowing that it would never truly be hers? Yet, the decision was made, and Hagar, though not fully understanding the depth of what was asked of her, had little choice but to comply. Her own life, though simpler, was bound to the decisions of those she served. Abraham, caught between the desires of his wife and the desperation for a child of his own, did not hesitate to agree. There was no animosity in his decision, only a quiet resignation to the fact that his path had led him to this moment. Hagar would be the means through which he would have his son, the son he had waited for all these years. And while Sarah's actions may have been driven by faith and frustration, the consequences of this decision, both immediate and long-term, would unfold in ways none of them could have anticipated. As Hagar conceived, the first stirrings of jealousy and tension crept into Sarah's heart. The child she could not bear now grew inside another woman, and with it came a bitterness she had not expected. The walls that had once stood between Sarah and Hagar would soon crack, giving way to a tension that would test not only their faith but their very bond. Hagar's pregnancy brought with it a quiet tension that filled the household. At first, the news was met with a sense of hope, as though the promise Abraham had received from God might finally be taking shape. Yet, for Hagar, the reality of carrying Abraham's child was far from simple. Her body, once a vessel of servitude, now carried the weight of an entirely different burden. The quiet murmurs of her growing belly mirrored the stirring of unspoken emotions within her heart. Hagar could feel the change in Sarah's eyes. The tension was palpable. Once her mistress, Sarah had become something more, something she could neither embrace nor understand. The love between them, if there had ever been any, had been cracked, leaving a distance that could not be bridged. Every passing day made it clearer that this child, her child, was not a blessing in Sarah's eyes, but a reminder of her own perceived failure. Hagar, though grateful for the opportunity to fulfill this role, could not escape the growing discomfort of being caught between two worlds, between the promise Abraham had received from God and the resentment brewing in Sarah's heart. The birth of Ishmael was a quiet affair, the house holding its breath as Hagar brought the child into the world. The pain she experienced was not just physical but emotional, as if the weight of her decision was felt in every contraction. When Ishmael finally arrived, his cries pierced the silence, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Abraham's life, but also in Hagar's, one she hadn't fully prepared for. As she looked into her son's face for the first time, there was a strange mix of tenderness and confusion. What was her place in this unfolding promise? For Abraham, the birth of Ishmael was a moment of joy, though tinged with the complexity of the situation. He had longed for this child, prayed for him, and now that he was here, a part of Abraham's heart felt fulfilled. Yet another part of him was unsettled, for in the birth of this child, the complexities of the household had deepened. Sarah's quiet resentment loomed like a shadow, growing with each passing day as she watched Hagar with Ishmael. Abraham tried to ease the strain, but nothing could undo the tension that had settled between them. Hagar, too, found herself caught in a storm of internal conflict. She loved the child she carried, but the promise of Abraham's descendants, this divine covenant, felt like something she had no claim to. She had borne this child out of necessity, not out of love or divine calling. And now, as the child's future seemed to intertwine with God's promise, she found herself wondering whether her role in this story was ever meant to be more than that of a vessel. Would her child carry the legacy of Abraham's faith, or would she be left to navigate the consequences of a decision made out of desperation? As the months passed, Sarah's resentment began to settle deep in her heart, turning into something much harder to ignore. At first, it was a quiet discomfort, a feeling that fluttered at the edges of her consciousness whenever she looked at Hagar or Ishmael. But with each passing day, it grew stronger, more undeniable. Every time Sarah saw Hagar and Ishmael together, she felt a pang, a sharp reminder of her own inability to bear a child. The sight of the boy, a living symbol of her failure, twisted in Sarah's chest like a dagger. It wasn't just that Hagar had conceived Abraham's child. It was the knowledge that Ishmael was everything Sarah had longed for, everything she had prayed for in her barren years. The child she had never been able to have, now thriving in the arms of another woman, seemed like an accusation. Hagar, for her part, felt the tension in the air. At first, she had tried to maintain a respectful distance from Sarah, aware of the fragile dynamic between them. She had been given a place in Abraham's household, a position of relative comfort, but she could sense that it would not last. The quiet glances, the way Sarah's eyes seemed to pierce through her, made Hagar uneasy. There was no overt hostility, but the subtle shifts in Sarah's demeanor were impossible to ignore. Hagar, for the most part, remained focused on her son. Ishmael was her world now, her reason for everything, but even her love for him couldn't shield her from the undercurrent of tension that began to permeate the household. Sarah, however, could not contain the bitterness growing inside her. The more she saw Hagar and Ishmael, the more she resented the situation. It wasn't just jealousy over the child, it was the feeling of being replaced, of being outdone by a servant, a woman who was younger and, in Sarah's mind, unworthy of the position she had taken. The fact that Abraham seemed to accept this child so readily, even with the divine promise hanging over him, only fueled Sarah's anger. She had given everything to Abraham, followed him across the land, endured years of waiting, and now she was forced to watch as a child not born of her own body was given a future she thought was meant for her own. Abraham found himself caught in the middle, his heart torn between the two women. He loved Sarah, the woman who had shared his life for so long, but he could not ignore the bond he had with Ishmael. Abraham had longed for this son, and now he found himself unable to choose between the two. The more Sarah's jealousy bubbled to the surface, the more he tried to mediate, to calm both women, but his words were powerless against the growing rift between them. No matter how hard he tried, Abraham knew that the situation could not continue as it was. His household was fracturing, and neither Sarah nor Hagar seemed willing to yield. It was in the quiet of one of the many nights Abraham spent beneath the stars that God spoke to him again, as he had so many times before. The air was still, filled only with the sound of the desert wind brushing against the earth. And yet, in that silence, the weight of God's words was overwhelming. Abraham had long trusted in the promise made to him, the hope of being the father of nations, but doubt had begun to creep in. The years had stretched on, the promises unfulfilled, and though Ishmael had come into his life, he knew the covenant was meant for something more, something greater than the son born out of impatience and struggle. God's voice pierced through the shadows of uncertainty, gentle yet firm. "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless," he said. The words seemed to reverberate not just through the air, but deep into the very core of Abraham's soul. There, under the infinite canopy of stars, God reaffirmed his promise that Abraham would indeed be the father of many nations. It was a promise that stretched beyond the confines of his lifetime, a covenant that would carry through generations. But then came the revelation that Abraham had long feared and yet hoped for. Sarah, his wife, would bear him a son, Isaac, despite her age, despite all the evidence that seemed to declare otherwise. God's plan would unfold in a way that none of them had expected. The news hung in the air, both miraculous and overwhelming. Sarah, who had long given up hope of bearing a child, would be the one to give Abraham the son who would inherit the promises made to him. Abraham, overwhelmed by the weight of this promise, fell to the ground, his face pressed to the earth. His mind raced as he considered the implications of God's words, and yet, in the stillness of the desert night, there was a deep, resonating peace in his heart. His submission was not one of doubt or reluctance, but of quiet reverence. He understood that this promise, though it seemed impossible, was not a gift he could claim through his own effort. It would come, as all gifts from God do, through grace. And with this submission, he surrendered his own will, knowing that God's plan was far greater than anything he could have imagined. The weight of the promise lingered, and Abraham knew that this child would change everything. His faith had brought him this far, but now, with Isaac's arrival, it would lead him into the fulfillment of a vision beyond his own understanding. He could only trust, with every fiber of his being, that the path God had set before him would unfold in its time. As Isaac grew, his presence in the household became a constant reminder of God's promise, a living, breathing testament to the covenant between God and Abraham. But as the years passed, the atmosphere in Abraham's tent began to shift. Ishmael, though the firstborn and beloved by his father, struggled with the reality of his place in the family. His mockery of Isaac, though not fully understood by the child, became evident as he grew older. The tension between the two boys, though subtle at first, became harder to ignore. Ishmael, already feeling the weight of his own status as the son of a maidservant, found it difficult to accept Isaac's prominence. Even though his father loved him deeply, it was Sarah who first noticed the growing strain. Her concern for her son Isaac grew with each passing day, as Ishmael's mocking laughter echoed in the air. The sight of her own son, the child she had carried against all odds, being taunted by her firstborn's actions was unbearable. In the quiet hours of the night, Sarah could no longer contain the hurt and anger that had been building within her for years. She approached Abraham, her voice trembling with emotion. "Cast out this bondwoman and her son," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." Abraham was deeply distressed. He had always loved Ishmael, the boy whom he had raised as his own, and the thought of sending him away caused him an anguish he had never known. Ishmael was his flesh and blood, and the bond between them was not one that could easily be severed. But Sarah's words, though painful, echoed a deeper truth that could not be ignored. Isaac was the child of promise, the heir to the covenant, and the division between the two brothers had become a barrier that threatened the peace of the household. In the quiet of his heart, Abraham wrestled with the painful reality of what needed to be done. God, sensing his inner turmoil, spoke to Abraham in a way that both comforted and pierced him. "Let it not be displeasing in your sight because of the lad, and because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called." Though these words brought a sense of peace, they also confirmed the painful truth. The separation was necessary. With a heavy heart, Abraham gathered the provisions for Hagar and Ishmael and sent them into the wilderness, his heart breaking with each step they took away from the only home Ishmael had ever known. As they disappeared into the distance, Abraham stood there, watching, knowing that the promises of God would unfold in ways beyond his understanding, but that this family division was a wound that would take years, perhaps lifetimes, to heal. The tension between God's promises and the painful reality of the family division would forever linger in the depths of Abraham's soul. Abraham stood in the quiet of the morning, his heart heavy with grief as he prepared to send Hagar and Ishmael away. God's command had come clear and direct, and though it filled Abraham with anguish, he knew that obedience to God's will was paramount, even when it led him to a path of unimaginable sorrow. The provisions he gathered for their journey were meager, but he trusted God would provide. Every step he took, every action seemed to deepen the ache in his chest. The boy he had loved, raised, and nurtured as his own was about to be sent into the unknown, cast out into the wilderness. Hagar, too, felt the weight of the moment. She had once been a servant, but now she was a mother, and the responsibility of her son's survival rested solely on her shoulders. Her hands trembled as she adjusted Ishmael's small pack, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. She had been cast out of Egypt once, and now she faced a similar fate. The desert, once a vast and merciless wilderness, now seemed like an insurmountable barrier between her and the life she had known. Fear gripped her heart, not just for her own survival, but for Ishmael. Her eyes lingered on Abraham, but there were no words to bridge the gap between them. The silence was suffocating. Ishmael, sensing the tension in the air, clung to his mother's side, his young face filled with confusion. He did not yet understand why his father, whom he had known as a protector and guide, had cast him away. To him, the desert was simply another place to roam, a place where he and his mother would find new adventures. But the fear in his mother's eyes and the coldness in his father's face told him that something much deeper was unfolding. He, too, felt the pain, though he could not yet comprehend its depth. As they walked, Hagar's mind raced. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the vast emptiness of the desert seemed to stretch on forever. With every step, she feared for her son's life. The little water they carried was quickly dwindling, and she could feel the desperate pull of exhaustion. She stumbled, but Ishmael, ever strong, helped steady her. He might not have fully understood the severity of their situation, but he knew his mother needed him. As the hours dragged on, hope began to slip from her grasp like the sand through her fingers. By the time they had collapsed under the shadow of a solitary tree, Hagar's fear had turned into despair. She left Ishmael resting beneath the tree and walked a short distance away, her heart torn. The anguish of being alone in the desert, without a home, without protection, weighed heavily upon her. She cried out, her voice carried away by the winds. Yet in that moment of deepest despair, God heard her. A voice spoke to her, gentle and yet powerful. "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for I will make a great nation of your son." Hagar, overwhelmed by the mercy of God, turned her eyes to the sky, her heart filled with gratitude. She returned to Ishmael, now comforted by the knowledge that their journey, though hard, was not one they would walk alone. Even as Abraham had to part from his son, the bond between them, though broken, would remain. God had not forgotten them. The sun blazed mercilessly as Hagar and Ishmael stumbled through the desert, the vast, unforgiving wilderness stretching endlessly before them. The weight of the journey, both physical and emotional, had begun to take its toll. The water they had brought with them had long since run out, and every step felt heavier, every breath more labored. Hagar's heart tightened with a deep, unsettling fear as she watched her son grow weaker, his small body drained from the heat and the thirst. She could see the desperation in his eyes, mirroring her own. Yet, as much as she wanted to hold on to hope, she knew they were close to the brink. The scorching winds swept over the desert, sending waves of heat rising from the ground, and Hagar felt the world closing in around her. She had walked this desolate land before, but never like this, never with her son's life hanging so delicately in the balance. She felt the weight of her failure pressing on her chest, failure as a mother, as a protector. She had been sent away, abandoned in this barren place with no one to turn to, no one to help, and yet she could not give up on Ishmael. Not now, not when he still needed her. With great effort, she found a small patch of shade beneath a sparse tree, and there she collapsed, too weary to continue. Ishmael lay beside her, his strength nearly gone, his eyes dull and unfocused. She placed her hand on his forehead, and for a moment she closed her eyes, pleading silently to God. Her heart cried out, asking for mercy, asking for help. She had nothing left to give, nothing to offer. She had tried, but it seemed the end was near. In her despair, Hagar could not bring herself to watch her son die before her. She turned away, walking a little distance from him, too afraid to face the inevitable. But it was there, in her darkest moment, that she heard a voice soft, yet commanding, speaking to her in a way she could not deny. "Do not be afraid, Hagar. What troubles you? I have heard the cry of your son. Lift him up, for I will make him the father of a great nation." She turned sharply, her heart pounding. There, before her, appeared a well of water, fresh and clear, springing from the earth in the very place where the desert had seemed to devour all life. God had heard her, and he had provided. She ran to the well, and with trembling hands, she filled her jar, offering it first to Ishmael, then to herself. The water was cool, soothing, and filled with life, a gift of divine mercy. As Ishmael drank, his strength returned, and Hagar's heart swelled with relief. She looked up to the sky, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. In that moment, she knew that God had not forgotten them, that Ishmael's life had purpose beyond this desert, beyond this struggle. The promise of God would carry them through the wilderness, and Ishmael would live to fulfill his destiny as the father of a great nation. As the days passed in the wilderness, Hagar watched her son's strength return. The well had been a miracle, a sign that God had not forsaken them, that they had not wandered into the desert to die. Each morning, as the sun rose over the barren land, Hagar would glance over at Ishmael, who was growing stronger by the day. His laughter filled the empty spaces around them, a sound that brought a small measure of peace to her heart. Despite the harshness of their life, they were surviving. They were together, and that was enough. But there was more than survival at play now. In the silence of the desert, with only the wind to keep them company, Hagar began to realize the true weight of God's promise. She had heard the words before God's declaration that Ishmael would father a great nation, but in the quiet, lonely stretches of time they spent in the desert, the depth of that promise took root in her soul. Ishmael was not just her son. He was chosen, not just to survive, but to lead, to become the father of many. His life held a significance far beyond her understanding, and she knew that she was called to raise him not as a mere boy, but as the one who would fulfill that divine promise. It was on one such day, as the sun hung low in the sky, that God spoke to her again. In a moment that seemed to stretch across eternity, a voice spoke from the heavens, not with anger or judgment, but with a quiet, assuring presence. I have heard your cry, Hagar, and I will bless your son. He will become the father of a great nation. I will make him into a great people, for I have promised you. Tears welled in Hagar's eyes as she fell to her knees, her heart full of awe and gratitude. She looked at Ishmael, standing tall beside her, his eyes bright with life, and for the first time, she fully understood the magnitude of the life that lay ahead of him. The world, with its vast deserts and cities, would know his name. His descendants would multiply like the stars in the sky, and he would play his part in God's unfolding plan. In that moment, Hagar realized something else, that she, too, had a role to play. She wasn't just a mother in the traditional sense. She was the mother of a nation, and her mission was clear: to raise Ishmael with faith and love, to help him understand the divine calling placed upon him, and to guide him through the trials that lay ahead. As Ishmael grew, the bond between mother and son strengthened. They had both been tested in ways that could have broken them, but instead, they were growing stronger, as unyielding as the desert around them. Hagar, once uncertain and lost in the shadows of Abraham's promises, now stood in the light of a greater truth: her son was destined for greatness, and she would be with him every step of the way. Together, they would face the future, the covenant of God wrapped around them like the desert winds, guiding them forward into the unknown. Ishmael's childhood in the desert was one of strength, resilience, and quiet wisdom. The vast wilderness became his teacher, and the harsh realities of the land shaped him into a young man whose resolve was as firm as the stones beneath his feet. Hagar, with her unwavering love, guided him with a steady hand, teaching him not only how to survive, but how to honor the life they had been given. Each day, as the sun beat down and the wind carried the scent of the earth, Ishmael learned the ways of the desert. He became skilled in tracking animals, skilled in finding water in the most unlikely places, and skilled in reading the movements of the world around him. These were the lessons of survival, the knowledge that would sustain him in the years to come. Though the world outside their small camp knew little of him, Hagar made sure that Ishmael understood his place in a much larger story. She spoke to him of his father, Abraham, and the promises that had been made to him, even if those promises had not been fully realized in the way that many had hoped. Ishmael knew the name of Abraham, his father who lived far away, the patriarch of a family he would never truly belong to. Yet, he carried with him the unspoken understanding that he was part of something much greater than the barren landscape in which he had been raised. In the quiet moments, when the fire burned low and the stars above seemed to stretch endlessly, Hagar would tell him of the covenant God had made with Abraham and how, though Ishmael's path was different, he, too, had been chosen. As Ishmael grew, his features began to mirror his father's strong, proud, and unyielding. His frame became that of a young man who could endure the most unforgiving conditions. Yet there was more to him than just physical strength. Hagar's teachings had instilled in him a quiet dignity, a resilience born not just from survival, but from understanding the land that had raised him and the legacy that whispered through the winds. Though he often wondered about his father's house, about the family he had been separated from, Ishmael carried a sense of purpose in the desert. He understood that his journey was his own, that his path, though not always clear, was meant to unfold in its own time. Ishmael's identity was never truly bound by the name of Abraham, though it was a part of him. He was the son of a promise, a son of the desert, a young man who would one day lead a great nation. But for now, he was a son of Hagar, wild, free, and unbroken by the world's rejection. In the desert, where all things were tested and tempered, Ishmael grew into a man marked by the land itself, strong, silent, and determined to honor his roots, even as he walked a path that few would ever understand. As Ishmael grew into manhood, the desert no longer felt like a vast, lonely expanse. It had become home, a place where his feet knew every path and his heart knew the rhythm of the earth. Yet, even in the wilderness, the customs of the world beyond still beckoned. Marriage, a sacred bond in his culture, was the natural next step, a union that carried with it both responsibility and honor. In his time, as in many others, marriage was a transaction rooted in tradition and necessity, a way to build alliances and strengthen families. It was a way to ensure the survival of the lineage, to pass down the teachings, skills, and values that would carry the legacy forward. For Ishmael, the decision was not merely about finding a wife. It was about ensuring the survival of his own future, of fulfilling the promises that had been made to him, even though the world at large had all but forgotten him. He married a woman from Egypt, a strong and capable woman, whose roots were entwined with the land of the pharaohs. She was not only his partner in life, but also a bridge between two worlds, the world of his mother, the desert, and the ancient land of Egypt, which had always been close yet distant in the heart of Ishmael. Together, they began to build a family. The children came as a reflection of his own growth, sons who would one day stand where he had, children who would one day carry his name and, perhaps, fulfill the promise of greatness that had been set before him. As they were born, Ishmael's heart swelled with pride. This was the continuation of a line, the inheritance of promises that had traveled through the winds of time. Ishmael's fatherhood was a solemn duty, one that carried with it the weight of the past and the hope for the future. His children, born of desert and Egyptian soil, would carry the legacy of Abraham's son into a new world, one they could shape in ways their ancestors had not. In the quiet moments, as he looked upon his children, Ishmael would think of his father, of the promises spoken over him, and the brokenness of their separation. He had once been cast away, forgotten in the shadows of a family he had never truly known. Yet now, as a father himself, he understood the depth of those promises, and he began to see the threads of his own life weaving into the great tapestry of God's plan. He was a son of Abraham, but more than that, he was the father of his own people, a living testament to the promise that had been given to his mother and to him so long ago. Through him, through his children, the legacy of Abraham would continue, carried forward by the hands of his own family. As Abraham grew older, the weight of years began to press down on him with an unrelenting force. His once vigorous steps had slowed, and his once sharp eyes grew clouded with age. The promise he had clung to for so long had been fulfilled in Isaac, the child born of Sarah's miraculous pregnancy. Isaac was his heir, the promised one, the continuation of God's covenant with him. But even as he gazed upon his son with love and pride, Abraham could not ignore the quiet ache that lingered in his heart. Ishmael, his firstborn son, was a shadow that remained in the distance. Abraham had sent him away, as God had commanded, yet the bond between father and son could not be erased by distance or time. The years that had passed since Ishmael's departure had not dulled the memory of his laughter, his presence, or the moments they had shared before the pain of separation had taken root. Abraham had sent Ishmael and Hagar into the wilderness, driven by the complex web of divine promise and family conflict. But now, in his old age, Abraham found himself reflecting on the son he had lost, wondering about the man Ishmael had become. Isaac had grown into the man Abraham had always hoped he would be, and the promise of future generations had seemed secure in his hands. But in his heart, Abraham could not forget the sacrifice he had made when he cast away his firstborn. Though Isaac's birth was a miraculous answer to a long-anticipated prayer, Abraham's thoughts often wandered back to Ishmael, to the wild child of the desert. He wondered what had become of him, how he had grown, how he had lived in the years since they parted. As Abraham's body grew frail, his mind returned to the weight of his choices, and he felt the pull of divine providence in ways he could never quite explain. His life had been a tapestry woven with faith, promises, and struggle. He had walked through fire and storm, and in his heart, he carried the knowledge that both Isaac and Ishmael were part of the promise. Isaac was the child of Sarah, the one with whom the covenant would continue, but Ishmael, too, had been blessed by God, as he had promised Abraham so long ago. In his final days, Abraham found peace in knowing that both of his sons, though on separate paths, were still part of the divine story. Isaac, as the heir, would carry forward the legacy, but Ishmael, too, would be the father of nations. Abraham, as he looked back over his long life, understood that the fulfillment of God's promises did not follow a straight path, but through twists, turns, and choices made in faith. And though he could not undo the past, he knew that the seeds of his legacy were still growing in ways he could not fully comprehend. Years had passed since Abraham had sent Ishmael away, yet the ache in his heart for his firstborn never truly faded. As time wore on, Abraham had become a man weathered by years of both blessings and regrets. He had watched Isaac grow into a young man of promise, and while he found joy in that, the memory of Ishmael lingered like an unspoken wound, one that he had never quite healed. One day, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, Abraham made the decision to seek out his son. The journey to find Ishmael was long, and the desert was vast, but Abraham's resolve never wavered. He carried with him the weight of a father's love and the complexity of years spent apart. He knew that this visit would be more than just a reunion. It would be an opportunity for healing, for understanding, and for a new beginning. When Abraham finally found Ishmael, now a grown man with a family of his own, there was a mixture of emotions that neither father nor son could put into words. Time had shaped both of them in ways that were undeniable. Ishmael, though still bearing the strength and resolve of his youth, had the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived through hardship. He was no longer the wild boy Abraham had once known, but a man in his own right, with a life forged through the struggles of the desert. The reunion was not without its tension. For Ishmael, the years spent away from his father had not been easy, but they had shaped him into someone who understood both the weight of the past and the importance of the future. Abraham approached him with a humility that Ishmael had not expected. The years of separation and silence between them had been marked by an unspoken question. Would they ever find their way back to each other? They spoke of the past, of the pain and the choices that had led them to this point. There were tears shed, not out of bitterness, but from the raw realization that life, though hard and filled with difficult choices, had brought them here, together. For Abraham, it was a chance to ask for forgiveness for the separation, for the years spent apart from the son who had been his first. For Ishmael, it was a moment of understanding that his father had acted in faith, though the pain of that faith had scarred them both. As the days passed, their bond grew, slowly and steadily, like the desert flowers that only bloom after a storm. Isaac, too, came to meet Ishmael, and though there was initial wariness between them, the shared blood of their father soon bridged the gap. The families, once divided, began to come together, acknowledging their shared history and the promise that God had made to both of Abraham's sons. The reconciliation, though imperfect, was a beautiful testament to the power of time, faith, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his sons. Abraham's final days came quietly, the years of his life having shaped him into a man whose faith had withstood countless tests. His body, though frail with age, still carried the strength of the promises God had made to him. Isaac, now the promised heir, and Ishmael, his son from an earlier chapter of life, both stood by him, watching the old man whose footsteps had once echoed with the weight of divine purpose. Time had not dimmed Abraham's wisdom, nor had it lessened the love he carried for his sons. In those last days, Abraham called both Isaac and Ishmael to his side, as though he needed them close, as though the culmination of his life and faith demanded that his sons witness not just his passing but the final blessing he would bestow upon them. There, in the quiet of his tent, the air heavy with unspoken words, Abraham spoke with a voice that was still strong despite his weakening body. He blessed Isaac first, reminding him of the covenant God had made with their family, the promise of a nation, and the hope of the generations that would follow. But when it came time to speak to Ishmael, his words carried a depth of love and conviction that reflected the complexity of their shared past. Abraham's final blessing for Ishmael was not simply one of recognition, but a reaffirmation of the promise that had been given to him long ago. He reminded Ishmael that his life, though separate from Isaac's, was not any less significant in God's eyes. Ishmael had always carried the weight of being the son born of Hagar, cast out from the promises of the household, yet Abraham's words spoke of his rightful place in God's plan. The blessing of nations would rest on both sons, in their own unique ways. As Abraham breathed his last, the impact of his faith was evident in both of his sons, Isaac, who would inherit the promises directly, and Ishmael, who would become the father of a great nation of his own. Both carried with them the legacy of their father's unwavering belief. Abraham had been the father of faith, and though his sons would take different paths, the foundation he laid for them was unshakable. His legacy was more than the land or the blessings he had received. It was the faith that he had passed down to them, a faith that would guide the generations to come. Abraham's death marked the end of an era, but the spiritual connection he had established with Isaac and Ishmael transcended his passing. They each carried a part of him within them, a piece of his strength, his resolve, and his unwavering trust in the God who had promised him so much. His sons, though different in many ways, would continue to walk in the shadow of his faith, each in their own way, and the promise God made to Abraham would continue to echo through their lives long after his passing. The day of Abraham's burial arrived, a moment charged with both sorrow and profound reflection. Isaac and Ishmael, though separated by time, distance, and the complexity of their family history, stood side by side, each marked by the weight of their father's passing. The cave of Machpelah, which Abraham had purchased as a final resting place for his family, became the sacred ground where the generations would meet again. It was here, in the stillness of the tomb's entrance, that the legacy of their father would be honored. For Isaac, this was a moment of closure. The deep bond he had shared with his father, filled with promises, prayers, and tests of faith, now lay in the final act of respect his father's body placed to rest in the land promised to their descendants. Isaac stood firm, the heir of the promise, but in this act of burial, he too found a moment of unity with his older brother, Ishmael. It was not a union forged by blood alone, but by the acknowledgement of their shared history. They were both sons of Abraham, both heirs to the legacy he left behind. The cave of Machpelah, a place that would be filled with the weight of generations to come, held the memory of their father's faith, and it stood as a quiet testament to the passing of a father whose life had shaped their destinies. For Ishmael, the burial of Abraham was more than an act of honor. It was a bittersweet reconciliation with the land and with his own place in the family. The land, so long distant and foreign, now felt like a part of him. He had been cast out once, rejected by Sarah, yet here he stood, not as an outsider, but as a son honoring his father's last wish. There was an emotional weight to it, the kind that only years of separation and quiet reflection can create. Ishmael's gaze lingered on the earth surrounding the cave, the soil that had borne witness to his father's first steps in faith, and now to the final act of his life. Though he had never truly been part of Abraham's household, this land would forever be connected to his own story. It was here that he would bury the legacy of his father, the promise of a great nation, and his own place in it. As the burial rites were performed, both Isaac and Ishmael felt a deeper connection to their father's legacy. The tensions of the past faded, and the family dynamics shifted. The years of estrangement between them gave way to a shared understanding as they stood together in silent prayer. Abraham's death had drawn them into a common bond, a link to the faith that had been the foundation of their father's life. They were both, in their own way, heirs to a promise that had been passed down through Abraham's unwavering belief. And now, standing together in the quiet of Machpelah, they honored him not just as their father, but as the patriarch who had bridged two worlds and left behind a legacy that would echo through the generations. As the years passed, Ishmael's descendants flourished, their numbers growing vast in the desert lands they had made their home. The promise spoken over Ishmael's life, that he would become the father of a great nation, began to take shape in the rugged expanse of the Arabian Peninsula. His children, and their children's children, became a proud and independent people, spread across vast stretches of desert, weaving a tapestry of culture and identity that would endure for generations. The Bedouin tribes, each with their distinct customs and traditions, found unity in their shared lineage to Ishmael. Though scattered, they carried within them the spirit of their forefather, resilient, fiercely independent, and bound by a deep connection to the land. The desert, which had once been a place of exile for Ishmael, became the cradle of a mighty people, a symbol of survival and strength. Their ways were steeped in the wisdom of the wilderness, and their survival was a testament to their deep spiritual connection to God and the land. As the centuries passed, the influence of Ishmael's descendants extended beyond mere survival. They became custodians of a heritage that included not only the practical skills needed to thrive in the harsh desert, but also a profound sense of faith and purpose. Their spirituality was rooted in the God who had spoken to Hagar and Ishmael in the desert, the same God who had affirmed the promise to Abraham's first son. The worship of this one true God, though shaped by the people's environment, remained central to their lives, guiding them as they navigated the challenges of their nomadic existence. The legacy of Ishmael's family was further solidified in the shaping of their identity as a people. From their stories, customs, and practices, a sense of pride in their connection to the patriarch Abraham remained strong. It was a lineage that traced back to a man who had been promised the very land they roamed, even though his immediate inheritance had been claimed by his younger brother, Isaac. The rivalry that once existed between Isaac and Ishmael, so long ago, began to fade in the collective memory of their descendants, replaced instead by a shared recognition of their father's role in the broader narrative of God's promises to the world. Though Isaac's line would go on to lead Israel and establish the Jewish faith, Ishmael's descendants were not forgotten in the biblical story. Their role, though less emphasized in the scriptures, was no less important. The children of Ishmael would eventually find their place in the larger biblical tapestry, particularly with the rise of Islam centuries later, when the Prophet Muhammad, a descendant of Ishmael, would bring forth a new understanding of faith to the world. In that moment, the prophecy given to Hagar and Abraham, the promise that Ishmael would father a great nation, came full circle, as Ishmael's legacy continued to shape the faith of millions across the world. The recognition of Ishmael's importance, both in the biblical narrative and in the broader scope of human history, was a quiet yet undeniable testament to his role as a patriarch of nations, forever part of the unfolding story of God's covenant with humanity. As time passed, the tribes of Ishmael spread further across the Arabian Peninsula, their influence growing and solidifying into a formidable presence. The once scattered descendants of Ishmael, bound by their common ancestry and the promise that had been made to their forefather, began to form a loose confederation of tribes. These groups, despite their independent nature, shared common practices, beliefs, and a sense of kinship that transcended the borders of individual territories. Their strength lay not just in their numbers, but in their resilience, honed by the harsh desert landscapes they had long called home. The Ishmaelites, fierce and proud, became a significant force in the region, their presence known far beyond the deserts they inhabited. Their caravans traversed vast stretches of land, linking the Arabian Peninsula with the broader world, and their trade routes became vital conduits for commerce. They played a pivotal role in the ancient world, connecting the East and West, and their cultural exchanges brought with them not just goods, but ideas. It was a world in motion, and the Ishmaelites stood at the heart of it, a testament to their forefathers' promise. However, as the Ishmaelites grew in power, so too did the ties between them and the Israelites. Though their relationship was complicated and often fraught with tension, it was undeniably significant. The descendants of Isaac, the brother of Ishmael, had long since established their own identity and kingdom in Israel. Their faith, culture, and politics were rooted in the covenant made with Abraham, which had been passed down through Isaac. Yet, despite the rift that had once torn their families apart, there remained a shared history, a history of a common ancestor and a shared divine promise that could not be ignored. Over time, the relationship between the two peoples would be marked by both conflict and cooperation. At times, the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael found themselves at odds, driven by competition for land, resources, and influence. The history of the two nations was filled with wars, skirmishes, and periods of rivalry. Yet, there were also moments of alliance and peace, especially when the interests of both sides converged. The tribes of Ishmael, with their vast desert territories and independent ways, were often sought as allies by Israel in times of external threat. In return, the Israelites, with their established kingdoms and spiritual authority, offered the Ishmaelites a degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the broader world. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, but there was always a recognition of shared roots. The story of Abraham, the father of both Isaac and Ishmael, was a thread that tied their peoples together, even when the winds of conflict blew fiercely between them. And so, the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac continued their intertwined journeys, sometimes as adversaries, sometimes as allies, but always bound by the legacy of their common father, a legacy that shaped the history of the region and the unfolding narrative of faith, politics, and identity. The descendants of Ishmael, scattered across the vast expanse of the Middle East, began to form communities and civilizations that would shape the region for centuries to come. As the tribes migrated from the deserts of Arabia, they carried with them the legacy of their forefather, Ishmael, and the divine promise that had been made to him. Over time, these people established settlements, some in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, others stretching across the Levant and into parts of North Africa. Their journey was marked by a deep connection to the land, as they adapted to the diverse environments they encountered while holding on to the traditions and values that had defined their identity. With the rise of new settlements and the foundation of cities, the descendants of Ishmael began to influence the cultural, political, and economic fabric of the region. Trade routes, established by their caravans, became vital arteries for the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. As nomadic tribes settled and formed more permanent communities, they brought with them their unique social structures, governance, and ways of life. These cities, steeped in the spirit of their ancestors, flourished with commerce, intellectual exchange, and artistic expression. The cultural imprint of Ishmael's people was undeniable, and their presence began to be felt in every corner of the Middle East, from bustling markets to the quiet, sacred spaces of their growing spiritual communities. Ishmael's legacy also gave rise to diverse spiritual practices rooted in his faith. While many of the tribes adhered to a form of worship centered on the one true God, as passed down by Abraham, each group adapted the faith to their own cultural context. The spiritual practices varied, with some emphasizing personal devotion, others incorporating elements of their surrounding cultures. Despite these differences, a common thread of monotheism ran through their beliefs, and a shared reverence for the traditions of their forefather remained central to their spiritual lives. The people of Ishmael continued to honor the covenant made with Abraham, even as their understanding of the divine grew and evolved through the centuries. In addition to the spiritual evolution, Ishmael's descendants developed rich cultural traditions that were interwoven with their faith. Poetry, music, and storytelling became integral to their identity, preserving the stories of their ancestors and their connection to the divine. These stories, passed down from generation to generation, were not only a means of cultural preservation, but also a way of reinforcing their deep sense of belonging and purpose. Through their art, their words, and their rituals, the people of Ishmael kept alive the essence of their heritage, ensuring that the legacy of their ancestor would continue to echo through the ages. Thus, the migration and spread of Ishmael's descendants marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Middle East, one where their influence would be felt for centuries to come, as they left an indelible mark on the region's cultural, spiritual, and political landscape. Ishmael's legacy, though often overshadowed by his half-brother Isaac's prominence in biblical history, quietly shaped the future in ways that would endure for generations. The influence of his life and the divine promise made to him became a foundational element for the people who called him their forefather. Ishmael's descendants, though at times divided and scattered, held tightly to the thread of his story, a story that tied them not just to Abraham, but to a larger cosmic plan that stretched beyond their immediate circumstances. His legacy was rooted in his role as a son of Abraham and his relationship with God, which offered a unique spiritual vision that resonated with his people. The spiritual teachings Ishmael passed down were simple yet profound, born from his understanding of God's will. His life in the desert, marked by adversity and divine intervention, became a testament to the faithfulness of God, and this narrative was central to his descendants. They inherited not only the physical connection to Abraham but the deeper, spiritual connection that Ishmael had forged with the Creator. Ishmael's God was one of patience, provision, and promise. His people, while geographically separated and culturally diverse, carried this understanding of a God who could provide even in the harshest of circumstances. This spiritual inheritance became a cornerstone of their identity, and it was preserved and practiced in various ways, from the prayers they recited to the principles they followed. Over time, these spiritual teachings expanded beyond the immediate descendants of Ishmael, influencing the broader religious landscape. While the Israelites continued to develop their unique identity and relationship with God, Ishmael's line too became a significant force in the unfolding story of faith. As both branches of Abraham's family grew, a spiritual tension remained between them, a tension that manifested in conflict, misunderstanding, but also in moments of unity. The legacy of Ishmael and Isaac, though separate in many ways, remained interconnected through the shared heritage of their father, Abraham. The descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, while often in opposition, could not fully sever the ties that bound them to their common ancestor. Their struggles, both physical and spiritual, carried echoes of the shared history they held. Even when tensions reached their peak, the memory of Abraham's faith and the shared promise of divine favor lingered as a reminder of their common origin. The rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael's descendants, particularly in the centuries following their lives, was not just political but also spiritual. Yet, despite the division, there remained a profound, if unspoken, understanding that they were both children of Abraham and heirs to the same covenant, a covenant that would continue to shape their destinies, for better or worse. In the end, Ishmael's legacy was one of perseverance, faith, and survival. His spiritual understanding of God, passed down to his descendants, continued to echo through the centuries, influencing the course of history in ways that stretched far beyond the desert where his life began. His people, though often marginalized, played a key role in the unfolding of God's grand narrative, and their connection to the divine promise would remain a living thread through the generations to come. In the Quran, Ishmael occupies a significant and revered role, not merely as the son of Abraham, but as a prophet of God, integral to the unfolding of divine purpose. While the Quranic account of Ishmael shares many similarities with the biblical narrative, it also highlights distinct elements that provide a deeper understanding of his legacy within the Islamic tradition. Ishmael's life is presented as a testament to patience, obedience, and submission to God's will, and his story serves as a source of spiritual guidance for Muslims. One of the key aspects of Ishmael's life in the Quran is his unwavering faith and his role in aiding his father, Abraham, in the completion of important divine tasks. The Quran recounts the story of Abraham and Ishmael, detailing how they both willingly submitted to God's command when ordered to build the Kaaba in Mecca, the sacred sanctuary of Islam. This act of devotion, along with their shared commitment to the worship of the one true God, serves as a symbol of unity and submission to God's will, a central theme in Islam. The Quran also emphasizes Ishmael's role as a prophet, entrusted with guiding people to worship God alone and live righteous lives. While the Bible portrays Ishmael as a key figure in the early formation of the Arab peoples, the Quran views him as more than a progenitor. He is a spiritual leader, called to deliver the message of monotheism to his people and to live as an example of how to follow God's commands. His status as a prophet solidifies his importance in the Islamic tradition, placing him alongside other great figures like Noah, Abraham, and Muhammad. Despite the commonalities between the biblical and Quranic accounts of Ishmael, there are notable differences. In the Bible, Ishmael is often seen in the context of a divided family, with the tension between him and Isaac playing a central role in his narrative. The Quran, however, focuses more on Ishmael's obedience and his role in the broader divine plan. The story of his near sacrifice, which parallels the biblical account of Isaac, is told differently in the Quran, with Ishmael himself expressing complete submission to God's will. This act of faith is a cornerstone in the Islamic tradition, symbolizing the ideal relationship between human beings and the divine. Ishmael's connection to the Prophet Muhammad is another significant aspect of his spiritual importance in Islam. According to Islamic tradition, the Arabs, as the descendants of Ishmael, are considered to be the people through whom God's final revelation, the Quran, was delivered. The Prophet Muhammad, who is a descendant of Ishmael, is seen as the continuation of the divine message that began with Abraham and his son. Thus, Ishmael's legacy lives on in the faith that binds Muslims together, and his role as a prophet reinforces the interconnectedness of the Abrahamic faiths. Through the Quran, Ishmael's life and teachings continue to inspire and guide Muslims. His unwavering faith, devotion to God, and role as a prophet underscore the spiritual significance of his existence, ensuring that his legacy remains firmly embedded in the Islamic understanding of divine purpose. The revelation given to Ishmael was not a singular event, but rather a continuous unfolding of God's plan for his life and the generations that would follow him. From the moment of his birth, Ishmael was marked as a child of promise, and as he grew, it became increasingly clear that his role in the divine narrative would be pivotal. Unlike his brother Isaac, who was born of Sarah and became the chosen heir of God's covenant with Abraham, Ishmael's path was equally significant, though different. While Isaac's descendants would form the nation of Israel, Ishmael's line would give rise to the Arab peoples, a nation that would play a key role in the spiritual history of humanity. In his youth, Ishmael, along with his mother Hagar, lived in the wilderness, far from the bustling cities of his father's household. Yet, even in this solitude, God's voice reached him, shaping his character and future. The revelation was clear. Ishmael was to live a life that embodied obedience, humility, and devotion to God, and it was through him that a new chapter of God's plan would be written. Though he was not to inherit the same covenant as Isaac, Ishmael was destined to become the father of a great nation, one that would carry the message of monotheism and devotion to the one true God. God's message to Ishmael reaffirmed that he would be a prophet to his people, teaching them the values of justice, submission, and faith. He was to guide them toward worshiping God alone and to uphold the divine principles that had been passed down through his father Abraham. Through Ishmael's descendants, the teachings of Abraham and the faith of the patriarchs would continue to thrive. His spiritual journey mirrored that of his father, a path of testing, submission, and ultimate faith in God's will. Just as Abraham had been tested through his own willingness to sacrifice his son, so too would Ishmael's journey be one of endurance and trust in God's wisdom. The revelation to Ishmael was not just a message for him alone, but for all who would come after him. It was a divine promise that his descendants would carry the torch of faith and that the world would one day see the fruits of his obedience. In many ways, Ishmael's life and his spiritual journey paralleled Isaac's, though their paths diverged. While Isaac would become the father of a nation that would receive the law and the prophets, Ishmael's descendants would give birth to a nation that would later be united under the teachings of the prophet Muhammad, their faith becoming a continuation of the monotheistic legacy passed down through Abraham. Through the revelation to Ishmael, a profound lesson was imparted to both him and his descendants. Just as Abraham had trusted in God's plan, Ishmael's journey was a testament to the importance of faith, submission, and the understanding that God's will, though sometimes veiled in mystery, always leads to fulfillment and purpose. The covenant, made with Ishmael and his descendants, was a divine declaration that extended far beyond his own lifetime. Though Ishmael was not the direct heir to the promise God made to Abraham through Isaac, God's covenant with him was no less significant. It was a promise that would shape the identity of his descendants and establish their place in God's larger plan for humanity. The covenant recognized their role as a people destined for greatness, called to uphold the values of faith, submission, and worship of the one true God. This promise did not just reflect a relationship between Ishmael and God, but also signaled the responsibility of his descendants to continue the legacy of Abraham. As the years passed, the Ishmaelite tribes grew and flourished, establishing themselves as a powerful presence in the Middle East. They spread throughout the desert, and the cultural identity of Ishmael's people became deeply intertwined with the land, their nomadic ways, and their commitment to worshiping God alone. The covenant served as a cornerstone of their identity, a constant reminder of their divine calling and the spiritual responsibility that came with it. Their faith was not bound by a fixed location, but rather was carried with them wherever they went, manifested in their prayers, rituals, and daily lives. The spiritual legacy of Ishmael's family was passed down through generations, and their influence would eventually stretch far beyond the desert. The line of Ishmael was not just a political or cultural force, but a spiritual one as well. As the centuries unfolded, Ishmael's descendants would play a pivotal role in the unfolding of God's larger narrative, with the ultimate fulfillment of their role arriving through the prophet Muhammad, a descendant of Ishmael. In this way, the covenant made with Ishmael laid the foundation for the rise of Islam, a faith that would spread across continents and impact the course of history. While the Israelites, descended from Isaac, carried the law and the prophets, the Ishmaelites carried the same monotheistic principles, though their path would differ. The spiritual journey of Ishmael's descendants continued to be shaped by the promise God had made with their forefather. The covenant called them to live in accordance with divine will, upholding the principles of justice, humility, and devotion to God. Through their devotion, the Ishmaelites would serve as a living testament to God's enduring faithfulness to his promises. In many ways, the covenant with Ishmael served as a bridge, linking the past with the future and offering a glimpse into the broader plan that God had for all of humanity. It was a covenant that was not confined to the pages of ancient scriptures but continues to echo throughout history, shaping the lives of Ishmael's descendants and the world at large. The legacy of Ishmael's family, rooted in the covenant, would continue to shape generations to come, a living testament to God's unyielding faithfulness. In the later years of his life, Ishmael found himself reflecting on the long journey he had walked, a journey marked by faith, struggle, and divine promise. As he grew older, the weight of his experiences settled upon him. He had lived through times of hardship, rejection, and separation, yet he had never wavered from the path God had set before him. Ishmael had witnessed his people grow, becoming a great nation in the land of the desert. The promise God had made to his father Abraham was coming to fruition, not in the way that others might have expected, but in a manner that reflected God's perfect plan. His own role in the story of God's covenant had been fulfilled, yet the task of his descendants remained. As he neared the end of his life, Ishmael knew that the time had come for him to pass the torch to his children. His sons, the future leaders of the Ishmaelite tribes, had grown strong and wise, carrying the teachings of their father into their own families and communities. Ishmael had been a man of few words, but the strength of his character spoke volumes. The principles of faith, perseverance, and devotion to God were ingrained in his children, as they had been in him. In the quiet moments of reflection, he could hear the voices of his ancestors, and in his heart, he felt the presence of his father, Abraham, a figure whose shadow had always loomed large over his life. He had never truly been his father's first choice. Abraham had always longed for a son through Sarah, the promised son, but the bond between father and son had been real. Ishmael's heart was at peace, knowing that he had fulfilled his place in the divine plan. The day came when Ishmael's time on earth was drawing to a close. Surrounded by his children and the family he had built, he offered his final words, imparting the wisdom he had gained through a life of service to God. His sons stood by him, their hearts filled with a deep respect for the man who had shown them how to live with honor and devotion. There was no grand farewell, no dramatic last words, just a quiet acknowledgement of a life well lived and a promise that the work he had started would continue. When Ishmael breathed his last, there was a profound sense of completion, as though the earth itself had sighed in relief. He had lived through the trials of life and had passed on a legacy that would endure. His death marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another for his descendants. As his family mourned his passing, they also understood that his spiritual journey was not truly over. The covenant God had made with him lived on in his children and their children, rippling through generations. Ishmael's name would be honored, his story would be told, and his faith would continue to inspire those who walked in his footsteps. The spiritual journey he had begun was eternal, continuing long after his earthly form had returned to dust. The death of Hagar came quietly, as the years had already etched their marks upon her body and soul. She had spent a lifetime wandering, sometimes alone, sometimes with her son by her side, but always with a deep, unwavering faith in the promises of God. Though her physical strength had weakened, her spirit had remained indomitable, and her love for Ishmael had always been a beacon of guidance and support. When the moment came, it was as though the earth itself paused for a breath. There was no great noise, no storm of grief, just a quiet surrender to the inevitable. For Ishmael, the loss of his mother was a profound and painful moment in his life. Hagar had been his protector, his guide, and the one person who had always understood him in ways no one else could. Her sacrifices had shaped his identity, her teachings had molded his spirit, and her presence had always reminded him of the divine promise that had followed him since birth. She had never been simply a mother to him, she was the embodiment of endurance, faith, and hope in a world that had often shown them little kindness. Losing her felt like the loss of something eternal, something irreplaceable. He could not remember a time without her, for she had been his world, his anchor. She had walked with him through the deserts, raised him with a heart full of faith, and taught him how to endure the harshest trials with grace. It was she who had kept his faith in God alive when the world seemed indifferent to their existence. Even as a child, Ishmael had understood that she was not just a woman of flesh, but a woman marked by God's favor. a woman who had been part of a divine plan that he, too, he was now a part of. In the silence after her death, Ishmael found himself in reflection, replaying the many moments they had shared. It was not just the memories of her teachings or her love that filled his heart, but the realization of the legacy she had left behind, a legacy not just for him, but for his children and their children. Hagar had given him the foundation upon which he would build his life, and now he was the keeper of that foundation. It was a heavy responsibility, one that was not simply about bloodline or lineage, but about spiritual continuity. Ishmael could feel her presence in the wind, in the desert air that whispered through the vast, open spaces where they had once wandered together. Her legacy was woven into the very fabric of his being. He would not mourn her passing in the way the world expected, for his grief was a quiet, inward sorrow. Instead, he would honor her life by continuing the path she had set him on, by ensuring that her faith, her strength, and her devotion to God lived on in the generations to come. With every step he took, Ishmael paid tribute to the woman who had shaped him into the man he had become, a man of God's promise, and he would carry her legacy with him, unbroken, for the rest of his days. Ishmael's life, though often overshadowed by the more widely told story of Isaac, left a lasting spiritual imprint on his descendants and on the world. The seeds of faith that had been planted in him during his early years in the desert with Hagar grew deep and strong, forming the roots of a spiritual legacy that would stretch through generations. The story of his birth, his survival against the odds, and his eventual rise as a patriarch in his own right, spoke to a profound connection to God's promises. Ishmael became a figure who embodied resilience, faith, and obedience, traits that would be passed down through his children and their children after them. As Ishmael grew older, he understood that his life was not just about him, but about the generations that would follow. The challenges he had faced, the harsh desert winds, and the isolation from his family had shaped his understanding of God's will. He learned to trust in God's timing, in his provision, and in his unspoken promises. In time, Ishmael became a spiritual leader to his own people, guiding them with the wisdom that had been passed down from his mother and, in turn, from his father, Abraham. The faith he had inherited from his father was now the foundation upon which he built his own identity and that of his people. Ishmael's influence extended far beyond his immediate family. His sons and their descendants were shaped by the values he instilled in them: a reverence for God, a commitment to justice, and a deep understanding of their place in the larger story of the Abrahamic covenant. Though Ishmael's role was often overshadowed by the more central narrative of Isaac's lineage, it was through Ishmael's bloodline that many of the principles of monotheism and spiritual discipline were preserved. The tribes that descended from Ishmael became known for their steadfastness in faith, their warrior spirit, and their adherence to the moral teachings that Ishmael himself had embraced. His recognition as a key figure in the Abrahamic faiths grew over time, particularly within the Islamic tradition, where he is revered as a prophet and a messenger of God. The Quran speaks of Ishmael's unwavering faith and his dedication to God's will, recognizing him as one of the great patriarchs who carried the message of monotheism to future generations. In Islam, his legacy is not only spiritual but also familial, as he is seen as a precursor to the line of prophets that would eventually culminate in the Prophet Muhammad. Through these diverse traditions, Ishmael's life continued to be a beacon of faith, resilience, and spiritual depth. His story, one of struggle, survival, and steadfast belief, reminds us that spiritual influence is not always defined by the size of one's immediate following, but by the quiet, steady impact one has on the faith of generations to come. His legacy, rooted in the desert sands of his early life, carried forth through his descendants and became integral to the ongoing story of the Abrahamic faiths. His name forever etched as a patriarch in the annals of history. The stories of Ishmael, much like those of his father Abraham, were once passed down through generations, carried on the tongues of those who revered his name. However, As the years stretched into centuries, much of Ishmael's life faded into the mists of forgotten history. The details of his early years, the moments of his trials, and the quiet wisdom he imparted to his descendants became shadows, half-remembered and sometimes distorted. Despite this, the essence of Ishmael's legacy endured, largely through the oral traditions of his people, preserving fragments of his story and the core of his faith. Oral history played a crucial role in keeping Ishmael's memory alive. For centuries, his descendants shared stories of his life, tales of his survival in the wilderness, his role as a patriarch, and the deep bond he shared with God. These stories were more than just family recollections. They were a testament to his unwavering faith, his resilience, and his significance as the firstborn son of Abraham. In each retelling, the spirit of Ishmael was preserved, even if the details of his life were lost to time. His legacy became a quiet undercurrent in the lives of his people, woven into the fabric of their culture and spirituality. Even as his name sometimes slipped from the broader consciousness of history, the passage of time and the shifting sands of history had a profound effect on the understanding of Ishmael's place within both biblical and Islamic traditions. In the Bible, his story is often secondary to that of Isaac, the son of promise. His role as a patriarch is acknowledged, but the focus is primarily on Isaac's descendants, and Ishmael is relegated to the background. This shift in emphasis created a historical imbalance, one that did not fully honor the spiritual depth of Ishmael's journey. Over the centuries, his story became relegated to the periphery of faith, overshadowed by the more widely told narrative of his younger half-brother. However, in the Islamic tradition, Ishmael's story flourished in its own right. He is recognized as a prophet, a symbol of faith, and a key figure in the lineage leading to the Prophet Muhammad. In this tradition, Ishmael's role is not overshadowed but rather elevated, with his devotion to God's will standing as a model for all Muslims. His story is not just one of survival or lineage, but one of deep spiritual significance, an enduring testament to his role in the larger plan of God. Despite the fading of many of the details of his life, Ishmael's influence remains. His legacy lives on in the hearts of those who share his bloodline, in the stories still told in the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, and in the hearts of millions who turn to his story for inspiration. While many of the lost stories of Ishmael may never be fully recovered, his spirit endures in the faith of his descendants, in the continuation of his covenant with God, and in the shared history of the Abrahamic faiths. Ishmael's influence on modern culture is far-reaching, though often subtle. His story, steeped in themes of survival, faith, and the struggle for identity, resonates with many aspects of contemporary society. Literature, art, and media have all found ways to draw on his narrative, interpreting it through the lens of modern sensibilities while remaining rooted in the ancient traditions that shaped his legacy. In literature, Ishmael is often portrayed as a symbol of exile and longing, a figure who, though cast out, carries within him the weight of a divine promise. His story, intertwined with that of his father Abraham, is reimagined in various forms, from historical fiction to spiritual allegories, reflecting the tension between his marginalization and his undeniable importance. In art and media, Ishmael is depicted in varying ways, often emphasizing the themes of resilience and survival in the face of abandonment. These portrayals resonate deeply with contemporary audiences, who identify with the idea of overcoming hardship and finding one's place in a world that often seems indifferent to their struggles. Films, television series, and books that explore themes of family, faith, and identity frequently draw upon Ishmael's story as a metaphor for the outsider, the forgotten, or the misunderstood. The image of Ishmael, wandering in the desert yet enduring, speaks to the human experience of grappling with isolation while holding on to hope and purpose. Beyond the realm of art, Ishmael's role in contemporary theological discussions continues to shape the landscape of interfaith dialogue. Within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, His legacy is seen through varying interpretations, each reflecting the religious and cultural contexts of the respective faiths. In Jewish thought, Ishmael's story is often considered a reminder of the complexities of divine promise and human conflict, a narrative that highlights the tensions between Isaac's line and his own. In Christianity, his figure remains a background presence, overshadowed by Isaac and later figures, but nonetheless serving as a reminder of the larger family of Abraham. In Islam, however, Ishmael is a central figure, a prophet, a patriarch, and a key link in the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad. His relationship with his father, his role in the building of the Kaaba, and his deep commitment to God's will are emphasized in Islamic tradition, making him a revered figure. This divergence in theological views fuels ongoing interfaith discussions, as each tradition seeks to understand its shared ancestry and differences. Through dialogue, Ishmael's legacy has become a bridge, allowing for a deeper understanding of the common roots that bind these faiths, even as they navigate their distinct paths. Ishmael's influence on religious thought extends beyond doctrinal debates. His story serves as a touchstone for modern discussions on faith, identity, and the concept of divine justice. For many, his life represents the struggle for recognition, the pursuit of destiny despite adversity, and the power of faith to transcend the limitations imposed by history and circumstance. As a result, Ishmael's legacy continues to impact how we think about the divine, human agency, and the connections that span across cultures and faiths. The relationship between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael has been marked by a complex, often tumultuous history, yet it remains an enduring thread that ties together two of the world's major faiths. Despite centuries of conflict, misunderstanding, and division, the shared ancestry of Isaac and Ishmael offers a foundation for reconciliation and deeper connection. In the modern world, this connection is explored in various ways, both spiritually and culturally, as people from these two lines find themselves navigating a shared history and, increasingly, a common future. Throughout history, the relationship between the children of Isaac and Ishmael has often been shaped by political and religious tensions. The descendants of Isaac, through his son Jacob, became the Jewish people, while the descendants of Ishmael, through his sons, formed the Arab nations, many of whom later embraced Islam. These two groups, while both tracing their roots back to Abraham, have experienced a complex and, at times, strained relationship. However, as the world becomes more interconnected, there is an increasing awareness of the deep cultural and spiritual ties that bind them. In the modern world, this connection is being rediscovered in a new light. Interfaith dialogue has become an important platform for exploring the shared heritage of Isaac and Ishmael's descendants. For many, the recognition that both families trace their roots to the same patriarch, Abraham, serves as a reminder of their common beginnings. Through this lens, the differences that have historically divided these two groups are seen not as insurmountable barriers but as challenges to be understood and overcome. The spiritual ties between Isaac and Ishmael's descendants are deeply significant. In Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, Abraham is seen as a spiritual father, and the promises God made to him are central to each faith. For Muslims, Ishmael is regarded as a prophet and a pivotal figure in the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad, while for Jews, Isaac represents the continuation of God's covenant with Abraham. Christians, too, recognize both Isaac and Ishmael as key figures in their spiritual heritage. This shared recognition of Abraham as a central patriarch provides a basis for deeper spiritual unity, even in the midst of theological differences. Culturally, the shared ancestry between Isaac and Ishmael's descendants is reflected in many aspects of daily life, including language, traditions, and customs. While the political and social realities of today's world may create challenges, the cultural exchange between Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities continues to offer opportunities for mutual respect and understanding. Whether through art, music, or food, The descendants of Isaac and Ishmael find common ground in the rich cultural expressions that have emerged over centuries of shared history. Ultimately, the ongoing relationship between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael offers hope for a future of unity and peace. By embracing their shared heritage, recognizing their common ancestry, and building on the spiritual and cultural connections that bind them, these two families can look toward a future in which their differences are not obstacles, but opportunities for deeper understanding and cooperation. In modern theological discourse, the figure of Ishmael occupies a complex yet vital place. His story, while often overshadowed by the prominence of Isaac, has undergone significant reinterpretation as scholars, religious leaders, and believers from various faiths reflect on his role in the broader narrative of God's plan. In particular, the connection between Isaac and Ishmael has become a focal point for discussions on divine promises, the nature of faith, and the spiritual inheritance that both sons of Abraham represent. For many contemporary theologians, Ishmael's story offers a profound exploration of God's justice and mercy. Though Ishmael was not the promised son of Sarah, he was, nonetheless, deeply embedded in God's covenantal plan. His role in religious thought, particularly within Islam and Judaism, highlights the importance of divine choices that transcend human understanding. In the Quran, Ishmael is not only acknowledged as a prophet but is also seen as a precursor to the finality of Muhammad's message. His life is viewed as an example of patience, faith, and submission to God's will, values that resonate strongly within Islamic teachings. For many Muslims, Ishmael is a symbol of perseverance and trust in God, an example of how divine promises unfold in mysterious ways. In Christianity and Judaism, Ishmael's role is often re-examined in light of the New Testament and the concept of the chosen people. While Isaac is viewed as the heir to God's covenant, Ishmael's story serves as a reminder that God's mercy extends beyond the immediate line of promise. In Christianity, the figure of Ishmael is sometimes discussed in the context of grace and the universal nature of God's love. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, uses the story of Hagar and Sarah to explain the difference between the Old and New Covenants, drawing a theological distinction between the two sons of Abraham as metaphors for two different paths of faith. In Jewish thought, while Ishmael is acknowledged as the son of Abraham, the distinction between him and Isaac is emphasized, reflecting the historical and spiritual significance of the covenant passed through Isaac to the Jewish people. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to explore the commonalities between these three Abrahamic faiths. The story of Ishmael has become a central point of focus for interfaith dialogue, as believers seek to find shared understanding in their reverence for Abraham and his sons. For some, Ishmael's story represents a divine blueprint for unity amidst the differences in religious tradition, emphasizing the interconnectedness of all Abrahamic faiths. Ishmael's influence continues to reverberate across the theological landscape. His legacy is felt not only in the sacred texts of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but also in the way these traditions shape modern thought on family, inheritance, and the nature of divine promises. The reinterpretation of Ishmael's life invites reflection on God's intricate and expansive plan, showing that even those who seem forgotten by history are, in fact, central to the unfolding of divine purpose. The descendants of Ishmael continue to shape the world in profound ways, their cultural, spiritual, and political influence echoing through centuries of history. Today, the legacy of Ishmael's lineage is embedded deeply in the cultures and nations of the Middle East and beyond. From the vast deserts of Arabia to the bustling cities of the world, Ishmael's descendants have maintained their identity as a distinct and resilient people, carrying with them the spiritual truths passed down through generations. The cultural impact of Ishmael's descendants is most visible in the Arab world, where the influence of Arab culture, language, and traditions dominates the region. Arabic, as both a language and a cultural artifact, has spread far beyond the Arabian Peninsula, becoming a key medium of communication for millions. The traditions of hospitality, respect for family, and a deep sense of community, which are rooted in the ancient practices of Ishmael's descendants, still define the way of life for many in the Arab world today. Spiritually, the influence of Ishmael's lineage is most notably seen in Islam, where he is revered as a prophet and the forefather of the Arab people. The teachings of Islam, shaped by the life and message of the Prophet Muhammad, trace their spiritual lineage back to Ishmael. His legacy is alive in the rituals and prayers of millions of Muslims around the world, and the significance of his story is woven into the fabric of Islamic identity. For Muslims, Ishmael represents unwavering faith, submission to God's will, and the enduring power of divine promises. Politically, the descendants of Ishmael have had an undeniable role in shaping global history. The spread of Islam from the Arabian Peninsula to vast regions of Asia, Africa, and Europe has left an indelible mark on the world's political, cultural, and social landscapes. The rise of powerful empires, such as the Umayyads and the Abbasids, demonstrated the influence of Ishmael's descendants in shaping the course of history. Even in the modern world, nations with significant Arab Muslim populations, including those in the Middle East and North Africa, continue to play pivotal roles on the global stage, influencing international affairs and shaping the political dynamics of the region. The lasting impact of Ishmael on world events is also seen in the ongoing relationship between his descendants and those of Isaac. The tensions and alliances between these two lineages have played out on the world stage, influencing the course of conflicts and peace processes, particularly in the Middle East. The centuries-old struggles over territory, religion, and cultural identity between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael are still central to contemporary global politics. Ishmael's descendants, though often overlooked in certain historical narratives, continue to be a vital force in shaping the modern world. Their legacy is not only one of survival and perseverance, but also of profound influence on global history. As the world faces new challenges and opportunities, the descendants of Ishmael remain central to the ongoing story of humanity, carrying forward the spiritual and cultural inheritance of their forefather. Ishmael has long been regarded as the forgotten son, his legacy overshadowed by the more prominent narrative surrounding Isaac, the child of promise. For centuries, Ishmael's story was relegated to the margins, a footnote in the greater narrative of Abraham and his covenant with God. His life and contributions were often dismissed, overshadowed by the perception that Isaac was the true heir of Abraham's divine promises. This relegation was not solely a matter of neglect in historical texts, but also a result of the complex tensions between the descendants of Isaac and those of Ishmael. Over time, the descendants of Isaac, particularly through the development of Judaism and Christianity, shaped the narrative in ways that further minimized Ishmael's significance, casting him aside in favor of Isaac's more central role in the Abrahamic faiths. However, in recent years, there has been a process of rediscovery, a reclaiming of Ishmael's place in the biblical narrative. Scholars, theologians, and spiritual leaders across various traditions have begun to acknowledge the importance of Ishmael in the unfolding story of God's covenant with humanity. His story, once buried beneath layers of interpretation and historical tension, is being brought back into the light as a vital part of the Abrahamic heritage. The renewed focus on Ishmael reflects a broader effort to understand the richness and complexity of biblical history, where all figures, regardless of their perceived significance, hold a crucial role in the divine narrative. Ishmael's place in the story of Abraham and God's promise is not one of secondary importance, but one that speaks to the depth and breadth of God's covenant. His life, though marked by hardship and separation, is filled with divine encounters and promises of a great future. The recognition of Ishmael as the father of a great nation, as a prophet, and as a central figure in the Abrahamic tradition is crucial in reinterpreting the biblical narrative in a way that honors the full scope of God's plan for his people. His role in shaping the spiritual journey of countless generations is undeniable, as his descendants continue to have a profound influence on the world, particularly through Islam. where Ishmael is revered as an ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad. The spiritual significance of reclaiming Ishmael's story is felt deeply within modern faith traditions, where the story of the forgotten son is seen as an essential part of understanding God's broader plan for humanity. His story embodies themes of struggle, faith, and divine promise, offering a perspective on God's grace and covenant that has been underrepresented in traditional interpretations. By bringing Ishmael's legacy to the forefront, faith traditions not only honor his role, but also acknowledge the depth and inclusivity of the biblical narrative. Ishmael's rediscovery, in essence, is a reminder that every story, no matter how seemingly overlooked, is integral to the unfolding of God's purpose in the world. Ishmael's life holds a significant prophetic weight, shaping the future of religious expectations and the fulfillment of divine promises. Though often overshadowed by his half-brother Isaac, Ishmael's legacy and role have profound implications for the unfolding of God's plan, especially in relation to future prophecies and the end times. As the firstborn son of Abraham, Ishmael is not merely a historical figure but a symbol of the broader narrative of divine promise and redemption. His life serves as a precursor to the spiritual journeys of future generations, particularly those that would follow through his descendants, the Arab nations, and, by extension, the rise of Islam. The prophetic significance of Ishmael is woven deeply into the fabric of religious expectation, especially in Islamic teachings. According to Islamic tradition, Ishmael is seen as one of the great prophets, a forebear to the Prophet Muhammad. His legacy is not only marked by his own life, but by the fulfillment of God's promises to him and his descendants. The Quran speaks of Ishmael as an individual who was chosen by God to help guide people toward righteousness, laying the groundwork for the later arrival of the Prophet Muhammad, who would bring God's final message to humanity. The connection between Ishmael and Muhammad is a central thread in Islamic prophecy, suggesting that the lineage of Abraham's firstborn son would be instrumental in bringing about a new era of divine revelation. In the context of biblical prophecies, Ishmael also plays a crucial role. While the Hebrew Bible focuses more on Isaac as the chosen heir of the covenant, the promise to Ishmael is just as important. God promises that Ishmael will become the father of a great nation, and this promise has theological implications for the fulfillment of divine plans across generations. As the progenitor of many nations, Ishmael's descendants are intricately linked to the fulfillment of God's promises, both in terms of their historical significance and their spiritual role in the broader narrative of salvation. The rise of Islam and the spread of the Abrahamic faiths can be seen as part of this fulfillment, marking Ishmael's legacy as integral to God's divine purpose. Theologically, Ishmael's role in the fulfillment of God's promises highlights the idea that God's covenant is not limited to a single family or line, but is extended through multiple generations and nations. Ishmael's place in prophecy speaks to the inclusivity of God's plan, emphasizing that his promises to Abraham were not only for Isaac but also for Ishmael. As the descendants of both brothers continue to play significant roles in shaping the course of religious and global history, Ishmael's life and legacy remind us that the fulfillment of divine promises often transcends individual lines and expectations, pointing toward a greater, more expansive vision of God's will. Ishmael's role in the Abrahamic religions is one of profound significance, yet it is also marked by both connection and tension among Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Each of these faiths holds a different perspective on his life, legacy, and spiritual significance, creating a complex web of shared history and divergent theological interpretations. While Ishmael is revered in all three traditions, his position as a central figure highlights the common roots of these faiths, as well as the challenges of interpreting his role in ways that unite and divide. In Judaism, Ishmael is often viewed as the son of Abraham's concubine, Hagar, and his status as the firstborn is acknowledged. Yet he is not considered the heir to the Abrahamic covenant. That distinction is reserved for Isaac, the son born to Sarah. The Hebrew Bible portrays Ishmael as a figure whose future was foreseen by God, who promised that Ishmael would become the father of a great nation. However, in Jewish tradition, his story takes a back seat to Isaac's, as the covenant and divine promises are focused on Isaac and his descendants. This difference in perspective has shaped the relationship between the Jewish people and the descendants of Ishmael, who are often seen as distant relatives but not as part of the chosen line of the covenant. In Christianity, Ishmael's legacy is similarly overshadowed by Isaac, whose line leads to Jesus Christ. The New Testament references the story of Isaac and Ishmael, particularly in Galatians, where the Apostle Paul uses the story of their birth to illustrate the distinction between faith and works. Ishmael is presented as the child of the flesh, while Isaac represents the child of promise. This theological distinction has reinforced the view of Ishmael in Christian thought as a figure tied to the Old Covenant, which is superseded by the New Covenant brought by Christ. Ishmael's role in Christianity, therefore, is more symbolic, reflecting the tension between the Old and New Covenants and the way in which faith in Christ is seen as fulfilling and replacing the law. In Islam, Ishmael holds a much more central and revered position. The Quran presents him as a prophet and a key figure in the story of Abraham's family. Ishmael's lineage is viewed as the precursor to the prophet Muhammad, and his role in the divine plan is one of guidance and righteousness. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael is celebrated for his devotion to God, and his story is integral to the understanding of God's covenant with the descendants of Abraham. His significance in Islam as a prophet and the ancestor of Muhammad creates a deep spiritual connection between the faiths of Islam and Judaism, though it also adds layers of theological complexity and potential conflict. The role of Ishmael in these three religions makes him both a unifying and divisive figure. His connection to Abraham, shared by all three faiths, establishes a common ancestry and a shared belief in one God. Yet, the differing interpretations of his legacy highlight the theological divides that have characterized interfaith dialogue for centuries. Ishmael's story serves as a powerful reminder of both the shared roots of the Abrahamic faiths and the challenges of reconciling differing beliefs, ultimately making him a symbol of both unity and division in religious discourse. Ishmael's legacy is deeply intertwined with the faith and obedience that marked his life, influencing not only his own descendants but also shaping the broader spiritual narrative of the Abrahamic faiths. Raised in the wilderness, far from the comforts of his father's household, Ishmael's life was defined by his connection to God, a relationship that sustained him through trials and challenges. His faith was not just a personal commitment, it became the foundation for generations that would carry his name and his beliefs forward. From his early years, Ishmael's life reflected a steadfast obedience to the divine will, following the path laid before him by God's promises. His acceptance of his mother's exile into the desert, his survival in the barren land, and his later role in carrying on his father Abraham's spiritual heritage all illustrated the depth of his faith. This was a faith that trusted in God's provision, a faith that relied not on earthly security but on the assurance of a divine covenant. In these moments, Ishmael embodied the strength of belief that transcended the hardships of his circumstances. The spiritual journey of Ishmael is marked by the divine promise that his descendants would become a great nation, a promise that served as a beacon for his life's purpose. Though his path was often overshadowed by the prominence of Isaac in the biblical narrative, Ishmael's faithfulness and role as a prophet in Islamic tradition elevate his importance in the spiritual legacy that flows from Abraham. His unwavering commitment to God's will and the trust he placed in the divine plan set a powerful example for his descendants, who would carry the torch of faith through generations. As time passed, Ishmael's descendants continued to draw on the strength of his faith. The tribes that emerged from his line became known for their resilience and for holding fast to the principles of monotheism. They honored the same God that Ishmael worshipped, and his life's example became the cornerstone of their spiritual identity. In Islamic tradition, his faith is celebrated as a key foundation for the practices and beliefs that continue to shape the Muslim world today. With Ishmael revered as a prophet and a pivotal figure in the faith's history, The lasting influence of Ishmael's spiritual journey cannot be understated. His faith became a model of obedience to God's will, even when faced with difficult circumstances. For his descendants, Ishmael's legacy of unwavering trust in divine providence became a guide for navigating their own trials and triumphs. His story, rich with themes of sacrifice, trust, and perseverance, serves as a reminder of the power of faith to shape not just individual lives but entire nations. As such, the legacy of Ishmael's faith lives on in the hearts of those who continue to draw inspiration from his life, a beacon of spiritual strength that endures across generations. The fulfillment of God's promise to Ishmael that he would become the father of many nations is a profound testament to the enduring strength of divine covenants. This promise, delivered in the desolate wilderness where Hagar and Ishmael had once wandered, was not just a declaration of survival, but a prophetic vision of a great legacy. As Ishmael's descendants spread across vast lands, the nations that arose from his line became powerful and influential, shaping the course of history in the Middle East and beyond. In the centuries following Ishmael's life, his descendants grew into mighty tribes, eventually forming nations that would play pivotal roles in the development of the region. The Arabian Peninsula, a land rich in history, became the heart of the Ishmaelite lineage. These nations, built upon the foundations of faith and perseverance, would stand as enduring symbols of the promise given to Ishmael. The tribes that emerged from his descendants, such as the Arabs, became central figures in the Middle East, their cultural, political, and spiritual contributions shaping the course of history. The historical narrative of the Middle East is incomplete without acknowledging the rise of these powerful nations. From the emergence of Islam to the establishment of vast empires, Ishmael's descendants were intricately tied to the shaping of regional and global history. The kingdoms and empires that arose, such as the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, are clear markers of the fulfillment of God's promise to Ishmael. These empires not only dominated the Middle East but also influenced the world, spreading culture, religion, and knowledge across continents. Their role in advancing trade, science, and theology became a legacy that continued for centuries, a direct link to the promise given to Ishmael. Yet, beyond the political and historical power of Ishmael's descendants lies a deeper, spiritual connection to the broader narrative of the Middle East. The presence of his lineage in the region is not only a testament to the fulfillment of a divine promise, but also a reminder of the intricate tapestry of faith, family, and legacy that binds the people of the Middle East together. From the time of Ishmael, the region has been a place where spiritual and cultural identities have merged, where the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, though often divided by history and conflict, share a common ancestry rooted in the same God. The story of Ishmael and the nations that rose from his line is one of divine promise, endurance, and fulfillment. His legacy continues to influence the Middle East and the broader world, reminding us of the lasting impact of God's word and the nations born from faith and obedience. From the humble beginnings in the wilderness to the rise of powerful nations, the promise made to Ishmael stands as a testament to the enduring strength of divine purpose in human history. Ishmael's connection to the Arab world is deeply woven into the fabric of both history and spirituality, creating a lasting bond that has shaped the identity of the Arab peoples for centuries. The belief that Ishmael is the forefather of the Arabs runs through the heart of Arab culture, providing a sense of unity and pride. For many in the Arab world, the story of Ishmael is more than a distant biblical narrative. It is a foundational myth that ties their identity to the promises made by God and the struggles faced by their ancestors. The historical link between Ishmael and the Arab peoples is anchored in the narrative of his life. As the son of Abraham and Hagar, Ishmael's journey was marked by challenges that reflect the perseverance and resilience that would later become defining traits of the Arab world. His life in the desert, his survival against the odds, and the covenant made with God ensured his descendants would become numerous and powerful. This promise manifested in the emergence of Arab tribes that spread across the Arabian Peninsula, and over time, These tribes formed a rich and diverse culture with deep roots in their ancestral connection to Ishmael. The ongoing significance of Ishmael's legacy in Arab culture is found not only in the reverence for his story but also in the shared spiritual beliefs that have endured through generations. Islam, which has been the dominant faith in the Arab world for over a millennium, emphasizes Ishmael's importance as a prophet and an ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael is seen as a model of faith and obedience to God, and his legacy is celebrated as a cornerstone of the Islamic faith. The Kaaba in Mecca, believed to have been built by Abraham and Ishmael, stands as one of the holiest sites in Islam, further cementing the connection between Ishmael and the Arab people. Ishmael's role in shaping the Arab world extends beyond the realm of religion. The cultural identity of the Arab peoples is deeply entwined with the values and lessons derived from Ishmael's life. His struggles and perseverance resonate with the Arab experience, especially in times of hardship and conflict. The sense of belonging to a lineage that has faced adversity yet triumphed continues to inspire generations of Arabs to preserve their heritage, honor their ancestors, and maintain their faith in the face of challenges. Politically, the legacy of Ishmael has influenced not only the Arab world, but also the broader Middle Eastern landscape. The descendants of Ishmael, throughout history, have played pivotal roles in the shaping of empires, kingdoms, and governments that have left a lasting impact on the region and the world. The influence of his lineage can be seen in the historical rise of Arab empires like the Rashidun, Umayyad, and Abbasid caliphates, which helped spread Arab culture, language, and Islam across vast territories. Ishmael's connection to the Arab world is not just a matter of ancestry, but a living legacy that continues to shape the region's religious, cultural, and political landscape. His story remains a symbol of perseverance, faith, and the fulfillment of divine promises, deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of the Arab people. Through his legacy, the Arab world continues to find strength, unity, and purpose, drawing inspiration from the ancient promise made to Ishmael and his descendants. The emergence of Ishmael's descendants as a prominent force in world history is a testament to the lasting power of a divine promise. From the deserts of Arabia, Ishmael's lineage grew into a people whose influence spread far beyond the region. His descendants, bound by the covenant God made with their ancestor, became the founders of great nations, each carrying a legacy shaped by the challenges and triumphs of their forefathers' life. As centuries passed, the sons of Ishmael forged dynasties, established empires, and left a mark on the political, cultural, and religious landscape of the Middle East. The trajectory of the Middle East was deeply influenced by the rising power of Ishmael's descendants. With roots in the Arabian Peninsula, the Arab tribes that emerged from his lineage helped define the region's complex history. From the early nomadic Bedouins to the great Islamic empires, Ishmael's legacy shaped the very essence of the Middle East. The rise of Islam in the 7th century brought with it a political and religious revolution, uniting vast swathes of territory under a single banner. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, both claiming direct descent from Ishmael through the Prophet Muhammad, played a central role in this transformation, spreading Arabic culture, language, and Islam across continents. As these empires expanded, they laid the foundations for the rich, diverse, and often tumultuous history of the Middle East. The influence of Ishmael's descendants reached as far as Spain, North Africa, and Central Asia, with each region shaped by the traditions and values passed down from his lineage. The cultural exchange and intellectual achievements during the Islamic Golden Age, advancements in science, medicine, philosophy, and art, echoed the legacy of Ishmael's people, who were now key players on the world stage. In modern geopolitics, the influence of Ishmael's descendants continues to resonate. The Middle East, a region fraught with both conflict and collaboration, remains deeply intertwined with the legacy of Ishmael's family line. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, and others carry forward the rich traditions of the Arab peoples, while also grappling with the complex political and religious tensions that have shaped their histories. The rise of powerful nations in the 20th and 21st centuries, from the oil-rich states of the Gulf to the broader Arab world, has brought the legacy of Ishmael's descendants into the modern era, where they wield considerable influence on global politics, economics, and security. The continued influence of Ishmael's family line in modern geopolitics is evident in the ongoing struggles for power, resources, and religious authority. As the birthplace of three major world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the Middle East remains a pivotal region in global affairs, with Ishmael's descendants at the heart of many of these dynamics. The legacy of this ancient promise, the story of a son cast into the desert yet destined to be the father of nations, endures in the decisions, challenges, and aspirations of today's world. Ishmael's legacy is often overshadowed by the conflict and division that has marked much of the history between his descendants and those of Isaac. However, beneath the surface of historical tensions, there exists a deeply rooted legacy of peace, unity, and reconciliation that continues to resonate in the lives of Ishmael's descendants today. The teachings and traditions passed down through generations have, in many instances, sought to promote peace and foster understanding between peoples of different faiths, backgrounds, and cultures. One of the more peaceful aspects of Ishmael's legacy lies in the spiritual teachings of his descendants, particularly within the context of Islam. Ishmael is revered not only as a prophet but as a symbol of submission to the will of God. His story, alongside his father Abraham's, speaks of faith, obedience, and trust in God's plan, no matter how difficult the journey may be. These principles, when interpreted in the light of contemporary religious and spiritual thought, have a powerful role in the promotion of peace. The idea that Ishmael and Abraham faced immense trials and yet remained devoted to God offers a model for patience, forbearance, and understanding during times of conflict. The traditions that have followed in the footsteps of Ishmael's descendants emphasize the importance of unity, not just among fellow Muslims, but between all humanity. Islam, as a faith, teaches peace as one of its core values. The word Islam itself is derived from the Arabic word for peace, salam. This value is deeply ingrained in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, who, according to Islamic tradition, traces his lineage back to Ishmael. Throughout Islamic history, there have been significant efforts to foster unity among diverse peoples, whether through the call to communal prayer, the emphasis on charity and helping those in need, or the promotion of social justice. These efforts have laid the groundwork for peaceful coexistence and interfaith dialogue, with many focusing on the shared values that connect the Abrahamic faiths. Ishmael's role in interfaith dialogue has also been significant. His story, as recounted in the Quran, serves as a bridge for understanding and cooperation between Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Although the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael have, at times, been divided by theological differences, their shared ancestry offers a common ground for dialogue and mutual respect. In recent years, religious leaders and scholars from all three traditions have used the story of Ishmael to encourage peace and reconciliation. They emphasize the importance of acknowledging the shared heritage that connects them and seek ways to build a more harmonious future, drawing inspiration from Ishmael's own journey of submission, perseverance, and faith. The peaceful legacy of Ishmael serves as a reminder that despite the challenges and divisions that have marked his descendants' history, the foundation of his story is one of unity, faith, and the hope for reconciliation. As long as these teachings continue to be passed down, the legacy of peace that Ishmael represents will endure, guiding future generations toward a more just and unified world. In the modern world, the story of Ishmael continues to resonate deeply within religious and cultural contexts, offering timeless lessons that transcend the centuries. As a figure central to the Abrahamic faiths, Ishmael's narrative provides a bridge between past and present, inspiring reflection on themes of faith, perseverance, and reconciliation. His story, often overshadowed by the more widely known figures of Isaac and Abraham, has found a place in contemporary discussions about interfaith dialogue, religious identity, and the search for unity in an increasingly divided world. Ishmael's story speaks profoundly to the modern religious landscape. For Muslims, he is a revered prophet, a symbol of submission to God's will, and a figure whose legacy continues to shape spiritual practices today. His unwavering trust in God, demonstrated when he and his mother were cast into the desert, echoes in the hearts of those who face adversity in their own lives. Ishmael's life encourages believers to embrace patience and faith during times of uncertainty. In this sense, his story becomes an anchor for contemporary religious thought, reinforcing the importance of steadfastness in belief and the recognition that trials are part of the divine plan. Beyond his spiritual significance, Ishmael's narrative plays a crucial role in modern interfaith movements. In a world marked by religious tension and conflict, the shared ancestry of Isaac and Ishmael offers a foundation for dialogue between Muslims, Jews, and Christians. The recognition of a common heritage allows for conversations rooted in mutual respect and understanding. By focusing on Ishmael's role in each faith, modern religious leaders have emphasized the shared values of compassion, justice, and peace. These values are not only central to the Abrahamic religions, but serve as a basis for bridging gaps between faith communities. Ishmael's story, framed through the lens of interfaith dialogue, highlights the potential for collaboration and reconciliation, offering hope for a more harmonious world. Ishmael's narrative also intersects with contemporary issues, providing insights into challenges that persist today. His story has relevance for modern debates on identity, belonging, and the complexities of cultural heritage. As a figure who was both a son of Abraham and cast into the wilderness, Ishmael embodies the struggle of individuals and communities grappling with questions of legitimacy, exclusion, and the search for meaning. His life reminds us of the ongoing challenges faced by marginalized groups, those who are often overlooked, yet are an integral part of the broader human story. By revisiting Ishmael's journey, society is encouraged to confront these issues, striving for greater inclusivity and recognition of all voices. In the modern world, Ishmael's story is a profound call to reflect on our shared humanity. It encourages the exploration of our common roots, while acknowledging the differences that make us unique. As religious, cultural, and political landscapes continue to evolve, the lessons from Ishmael's life remain as relevant today as ever, guiding individuals toward greater unity and understanding in a fragmented world. Ishmael's spiritual journey was one marked by profound challenges, unwavering faith, and an enduring connection to God that not only shaped his own life, but also laid the foundation for generations to come. Born into a world where his existence was overshadowed by the promise given to Isaac, Ishmael's path was never easy. From the moment of his birth, he carried the weight of being a child of the desert, with his mother, Hagar, having been cast aside by the very family that had promised him a place. Yet, it was within these hardships that Ishmael's faith was tested and strengthened, forming a spiritual legacy that would endure for centuries. The trials that Ishmael faced began early in his life. As a child, he and his mother wandered the unforgiving desert, having been cast out by Sarah, Abraham's wife. This moment of abandonment was not just a physical journey but a spiritual one, as Ishmael, like his mother, had to rely solely on God's mercy and provision. The moment of divine intervention when Hagar found the well in the desert became a defining moment in Ishmael's understanding of God. This was not a mere survival, but a confirmation that God was with him, guiding him through the desolate wilderness. It was this deep trust in God's providence that became the cornerstone of Ishmael's faith. As Ishmael grew, his understanding of God matured. Though he had been pushed aside by his half-brother Isaac's lineage, Ishmael never doubted his place in God's plan. His journey through the wilderness, learning to live by faith and survival, shaped him into a leader among his people. His faith was not a passive inheritance but a living, breathing force that spoke of resilience, hope, and the divine protection that accompanied him. His relationship with God was not based on privilege, but on his ability to endure hardship and still call upon the Almighty. Ishmael's faith had a transformative impact not only on himself but on his descendants. His story became one of inspiration for those who would later follow in his footsteps. His belief in God's promises, despite being a son cast into exile, set a spiritual example for his children and their children. The people who descended from him, the Ishmaelites, carried forward his teachings, drawing strength from his story of survival and faith. His legacy was not just in the bloodline, but in the faith he instilled in his community, urging them to hold on to the divine promises and to trust in God's guidance through all of life's trials. Ishmael's spiritual journey also became a symbol of reconciliation, of finding peace in the wilderness. It was in his relationship with God that he discovered his purpose. Beyond being a rival to Isaac's line, his life became a testament to the fact that God's blessings are not always given in the way we expect, but that does not make them any less profound. Through Ishmael's faith, he shaped not just his own spiritual path, but also helped carve a path for his descendants, imparting to them the knowledge that faith is forged in the fire of hardship and that God's promises are steadfast even in the most trying of circumstances. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael holds a position of great reverence and significance. He is seen not only as the son of Abraham but as a prophet, deeply connected to the core principles of monotheism. His life and journey are woven into the fabric of Islamic theology, where he is recognized as a key figure in the narrative of God's guidance to humanity. The Quran, which serves as the spiritual and moral guide for Muslims, offers a portrayal of Ishmael that emphasizes his unwavering faith, obedience, and his role in fulfilling divine purpose. The relationship between Ishmael and his father Abraham is one of profound devotion and submission to God. In the Quran, Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his beloved son, Ishmael, in obedience to God's command is highlighted as a supreme act of faith. This moment, known as the sacrifice, is not just a test of obedience but a testament to the deep spiritual bond between father and son. Ishmael, in this narrative, exemplifies trust in God's will, echoing the values of submission, sacrifice, and steadfastness. The Quran praises both Abraham and Ishmael for their unshakable commitment to God, noting their collective role in establishing and upholding the belief in the one true God. Ishmael's role as a prophet is also significant in Islam. He is considered one of the early messengers who helped guide his people to worship God alone and reject idolatry. Ishmael's dedication to God and his mission is remembered and celebrated in Islamic teachings, where his lineage is revered as carrying forward the monotheistic tradition. His story is a source of inspiration for Muslims, who draw strength from his example of resilience in the face of adversity and his unwavering belief in the will of God. Moreover, the Quran speaks of Ishmael's importance in the foundation of the Kaaba, the holiest site in Islam, located in Mecca. Along with his father Abraham, Ishmael is credited with the task of raising the foundations of the Kaaba, a central point of pilgrimage for Muslims. This act connects Ishmael not only to the religious history of Islam but to its ongoing spiritual practices. The significance of this role in the Quran underscores the lasting impact of Ishmael's life on Islamic traditions and rituals. Ishmael's story in Islam is one of faith, obedience, and divine purpose. His legacy, as both a prophet and the son of Abraham, extends far beyond his lifetime, influencing generations of Muslims who look to him as a model of devotion and trust in God. In Islamic thought, Ishmael's life is not just a part of history but a spiritual beacon, guiding believers to live with sincerity, humility, and dedication to the will of God. Through the Quran's depiction, Ishmael is remembered as a pivotal figure in the ongoing journey of faith and divine guidance. The test that Ishmael faced in his life stands as one of the most profound moments of faith and submission in religious history. It is a test not just of physical endurance or sacrifice, but of the spirit's unwavering trust in God's will. In Islamic, Jewish, and Christian traditions alike, The story of Ishmael's willingness to be sacrificed by his father Abraham holds deep spiritual meaning, illustrating the profound nature of obedience to the divine. The willingness of Ishmael to surrender himself to God's command, even in the face of such an extreme trial, remains a powerful example of devotion and faith. In the Quran, the story unfolds with a striking simplicity, yet the emotions and significance are immense. Abraham, after receiving a divine command in a dream, is instructed to sacrifice his son. Without hesitation, Ishmael submits to God's will, offering no resistance or objection. In that moment, he embodies the essence of Islamic submission, or Islam, which means surrender to God's will. Ishmael's willingness to lay down his life represents the highest form of obedience, a complete surrender to the divine command. His acceptance is not driven by fear or despair, but by faith in God's wisdom and righteousness. The spiritual lesson from this test is manifold. It teaches the believer about trust in God's greater plan, even when that plan seems incomprehensible. Ishmael's reaction to his father's words, accepting his fate with grace and courage, teaches us that true faith is not about understanding every step of the journey, but trusting in the ultimate purpose of the divine. This lesson of trust and obedience transcends generations, becoming a cornerstone in understanding the nature of human submission to God. Moreover, the willingness of both Abraham and Ishmael to endure this test offers a deep reflection on the nature of sacrifice. In surrendering his son, Abraham shows his total commitment to God's will, even when it seems to challenge his deepest bonds. For Ishmael, it is not just a willingness to die. It is a willingness to live with a faith that encompasses both life and death, a recognition that obedience to God is more important than personal desires or survival. His acceptance of his fate symbolizes the ultimate submission, a complete giving of oneself to the divine. This moment of testing also serves as a reminder of the broader narrative of faith in each of the Abrahamic faiths. In their willingness to submit, both father and son become models of devotion and purity, teaching generations of believers the value of submission, trust, and sacrifice. Ishmael's story reminds us that the true essence of faith is not in avoiding trials but in trusting God through them. The spiritual significance of Ishmael's test extends far beyond his individual journey. It becomes a symbol for all those who walk the path of faith, demonstrating that the greatest spiritual victories are found in submission to the divine will, no matter the personal cost. The legacy of Ishmael's lineage, though long overlooked by many, has continued to grow and influence the world across generations. As the son of Abraham, Ishmael's story has always been more than a tale of a forgotten son. It is one of profound spiritual significance that has echoed through the centuries, shaping the course of history. His descendants have spread across the globe, forming nations, cultures, and faiths that carry the weight of his lineage and the promise made to him by God. The rebirth of Ishmael's lineage can be seen in the cultural, political, and spiritual impact his descendants have had in the modern world. From the vast expanse of the Arabian Peninsula to the far reaches of the Middle East, Ishmael's people have played pivotal roles in the development of civilization, from the rise of powerful empires to the spread of faith and knowledge. In particular, the legacy of the Islamic world, deeply intertwined with the descendants of Ishmael, has left an indelible mark on the fabric of global history. The faith that traces its roots to Ishmael has shaped societies, defined political boundaries, and influenced the spiritual direction of millions. In the present day, the story of Ishmael stands as a powerful reminder of the cyclical nature of history. For centuries, he was seen as a forgotten son, overshadowed by the rise of Isaac's lineage. Yet in recent times, there has been a resurgence of interest in Ishmael's place in the Abrahamic narrative. His story has been reclaimed by scholars, theologians, and people of faith alike. This rebirth is not just a reawakening of a historical figure, but a spiritual revival, as more and more people come to recognize the significance of Ishmael and his descendants in the ongoing spiritual journey of the world. As the world moves forward, The influence of Ishmael's legacy continues to shape the future. His story has become a beacon of faith, illustrating the power of submission to God's will and the strength that can be found in enduring hardship with patience and trust. Ishmael's willingness to sacrifice, his embodiment of faith in the face of adversity, and his role as the patriarch of a great nation have inspired countless generations. His descendants, like the stars in the sky, have multiplied and spread their influence across the world, carrying with them the lessons of his life and the covenant made with his father. The cyclical nature of Ishmael's story of a once-forgotten son who has now risen to spiritual prominence speaks to the enduring power of faith, resilience, and divine promise. From the desert wilderness where he once wandered with his mother, to the thriving nations that carry his name today, Ishmael's legacy continues to thrive, reminding us all that even those who seem forgotten can play a significant role in the grand tapestry of history. His story is one of redemption, a testament to the transformative power of faith and the ability of a single lineage to shape the world across generations. The future of Ishmael's legacy is one that holds both promise and responsibility. As the world continues to evolve, so too does the impact of his descendants. His story, though centuries old, remains relevant as his lineage continues to shape the spiritual, cultural, and political landscapes of the modern world. The future of Ishmael's legacy is intricately woven into the fabric of today's global society, and his descendants are still defining the course of history in ways that echo the promises made to him long ago. As the descendants of Ishmael, particularly within the Islamic world, continue to grow and thrive, their influence reaches far beyond the Middle East. The contributions to science, philosophy, literature, and art, which have been shaped by the legacy of his people, continue to transform societies and cultures around the world. Ishmael's spiritual and cultural legacy has fostered a rich tradition of faith and learning that transcends geographical and political boundaries. His descendants carry with them not only the weight of history but the power of belief that has sustained them through centuries of trials and triumphs. As they contribute to global discourse, they also honor the spiritual foundation that was set by their forefather, keeping alive the lessons of faith, perseverance, and obedience that Ishmael exemplified. The influence of Ishmael's life is not limited to the past or present, but stretches into the future of faith and culture. His role as the firstborn son of Abraham, and the promise that God made to him, continues to resonate in the lives of millions of people who trace their spiritual lineage back to him. The future of faith, particularly in the Abrahamic traditions, hinges on a deeper understanding of Ishmael's place in the divine narrative. As interfaith dialogue grows, there is a growing recognition of the shared heritage between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael. This shared past, while marked by division at times, also offers a rich opportunity for reconciliation and unity. Ishmael's legacy, rooted in his submission to God's will, can offer a path toward greater cooperation and mutual respect among different religious and cultural communities. Looking ahead, the future of Ishmael's legacy will continue to be defined by the actions and choices of his descendants. They will carry forward the legacy of faith and culture that has been handed down through generations, molding the future in ways that honor their spiritual heritage. Whether in the realm of politics, education, or religious discourse, the future will undoubtedly see continued contributions from those who are descended from Ishmael as they shape the course of world history in ways that will carry his legacy forward for generations to come. Ishmael's life was one of divine promise and fulfillment, and his descendants continue to carry that promise into the future, affecting the world's spiritual and cultural landscape for years to come. For centuries, Ishmael's legacy remained overshadowed, his story often relegated to the background while the narrative of Isaac and his descendants took center stage. As the forgotten son, Ishmael's significance was obscured by time, and his role in the broader biblical and spiritual context was either ignored or misunderstood. But in recent years, there has been a renewed effort to rediscover and honor Ishmael's contributions to history and faith, bringing forth a narrative that had long been sidelined. This rediscovery marks a profound shift in how the story of Abraham's sons is understood, offering a deeper, more inclusive reflection on the past. To remember Ishmael is to acknowledge the complexity of his story, the trials he endured, the promises made to him, and the legacy he left for future generations. It is a journey that connects the past to the present, one that allows for the healing of historical wounds and the reconciliation of long-held divisions. His life, once viewed through the lens of abandonment and neglect, is now seen as a testament to resilience, divine purpose, and the power of faith. Ishmael's willingness to follow God's command, his survival against all odds, and his eventual fulfillment of God's promises serve as powerful reminders of the strength and endurance embedded in his character. As modern scholars and spiritual leaders revisit Ishmael's story, they are forced to confront the emotional weight of centuries of neglect. The spiritual significance of Ishmael, who was once cast aside in favor of Isaac, has been too long buried under layers of exclusion and misunderstanding. But now, as his story is brought to light, there is an emotional reckoning, a collective moment of reflection. It is a reminder that the legacy of Abraham's sons cannot be fully understood without recognizing both Isaac and Ishmael. The journey to understand Ishmael's significance is not just an academic exercise, it is a deeply emotional one. It calls for the acknowledgement of an entire history that was overlooked and the embracing of a fuller, more complete story that honors both sons equally. In this new light, Ishmael's narrative reshapes the understanding of Abraham's family. The traditional binary between Isaac and Ishmael is transformed into a broader, more inclusive story of divine promise, faith, and the complexities of human relationships. The rediscovery of Ishmael's significance does more than just correct historical omissions. It offers a vision of spiritual wholeness, where the contributions of all figures are valued. Ishmael's memory, long obscured, now finds a place in the ongoing conversation about faith, family, and the promises of God. His story, once forgotten, is now woven back into the fabric of religious thought, and in doing so, reshapes the narrative of Abraham's sons for generations to come. The enduring legacy of Ishmael's family is a testament to the resilience of faith, the fulfillment of divine promises, and the profound impact of a lineage that spans centuries. Though Ishmael's life was marked by struggles, his descendants have carried forward a legacy of influence, shaping the religious, cultural, and political landscapes of the world in ways both seen and unseen. Ishmael's story, once relegated to the shadows of history, now stands as a powerful reminder of the strength and complexity embedded in the lineage that God promised to bless. Through his descendants, Ishmael's legacy has not only endured but thrived, impacting millions across the globe. Ishmael's family played a pivotal role in shaping the course of religious history. His descendants, the Arabs, became the bearers of Islam, one of the world's major faiths, and have left an indelible mark on the spiritual lives of countless people. The connection between the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, continues to be influenced by the story of Ishmael, with each tradition acknowledging his significance in varying degrees. His legacy is woven deeply into the fabric of these religions, bridging historical divides and contributing to shared themes of faith, obedience, and the fulfillment of God's will. Beyond the religious realm, Ishmael's descendants have played a central role in shaping the political and cultural dynamics of the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. The empires and nations that trace their origins back to Ishmael have left lasting impressions on global history. The rise of powerful Islamic caliphates, the spread of knowledge and art, and the shaping of modern geopolitics all bear the marks of his family's influence. From the earliest days of Islam to the modern Arab world, the legacy of Ishmael's descendants is one of strength, unity, and a commitment to preserving a faith that has shaped the lives of millions. The lasting significance of Ishmael in the spiritual lives of millions is evident in the continued reverence for his story, particularly in Islamic tradition. As the ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad, Ishmael's spiritual importance transcends the boundaries of time and place. In the Quran, Ishmael is revered not only as the son of Abraham but also as a prophet in his own right, entrusted with guiding people toward worship and submission to the one God. His legacy is honored through daily prayers, pilgrimages, and the teachings passed down through generations. In the broader spiritual context, Ishmael's story is a reminder that divine promises are not limited by human understanding or expectations. His family's legacy speaks to the power of patience, the strength of faith, and the enduring nature of God's plans. The influence of Ishmael's descendants continues to shape the global religious landscape, offering a beacon of faith to those who look to his life as an example of submission, resilience, and divine purpose. Ishmael, though often forgotten in the past, now stands at the forefront of a spiritual narrative that spans generations, cultures, and continents, continuing to impact the lives of millions and to inspire hope in the hearts of those who follow in his footsteps. Ishmael's life was one defined by his search for truth, much like his half-brother Isaac. From his early years in the wilderness, where survival required both faith and resilience, to his later life, Ishmael's journey reflects the human quest for understanding. His path was not always clear, and it was shaped by the circumstances of his birth and the tension between his lineage and that of Isaac. Yet, throughout it all, Ishmael's unwavering trust in God's plan revealed a profound truth that transcended his personal struggles, one that resonates deeply with humanity's own search for meaning in a complex world. Ishmael's journey was marked by moments of profound uncertainty, yet he navigated them with a strength drawn from his faith. His life unfolded under the shadow of divine promise, and he became a symbol of perseverance in the face of adversity. From the time he was cast into the desert with his mother, Hagar, to the moment when he faced the tests set before him, Ishmael's quest for understanding was a journey of faith in God's providence. Unlike Isaac, whose faith was shaped by a promise that came with a legacy of security, Ishmael's story was one of finding his place in a world that often overlooked his significance. Through this, he came to embody the universal human experience of seeking answers to the deeper questions of life. The search for truth was not just about understanding his place in the world. It was also about discovering the broader truths of existence. In Ishmael's life, we see the struggle of coming to terms with identity, faith, and destiny. His willingness to follow God's command, even in the face of potential sacrifice, speaks to a deeper quest that many people face: a desire to understand the purpose behind suffering and the meaning of divine testing. In his story, Ishmael demonstrates that truth is often found not in the answers, but in the journey itself, in the process of seeking, and the faith that sustains one through trials. Ishmael's contribution to the broader narrative of truth and faith is undeniable. He is a central figure in Islam, where he is regarded not only as the son of Abraham, but also as a prophet who helped establish the worship of the one God. His willingness to submit to God's will became a model for others to follow. His life shows how truth is not always a simple answer or a destination, but a continual process of faith, learning, and growing in relationship with the divine. Through Ishmael, we understand that seeking truth requires patience, sacrifice, and the willingness to trust, even when the road ahead is unclear. His legacy as a figure of spiritual strength continues to inspire those who, like him, search for meaning in a world full of uncertainty. The journey of reconciliation and unity between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael has been long and fraught with challenges, yet it holds immense significance for the future. The historical divide between these two lineages, born out of family conflict and divine promise, has created a complex narrative of estrangement and eventual hope for reconciliation. While the tensions between Isaac's and Ishmael's descendants have played out through centuries of religious and cultural conflict, the ongoing journey toward unity remains vital in shaping a more harmonious future. Ishmael's legacy offers a powerful foundation for this reconciliation, a testament to the potential for healing and understanding where division once seemed insurmountable. Ishmael's life story, often overlooked in the shadow of his brother Isaac, offers profound lessons in forgiveness, endurance, and the importance of seeing beyond past wrongs. His role in the broader biblical narrative, though marked by separation from his father Abraham and Isaac, has been increasingly recognized as central to the unfolding of God's plan for both families. While the wounds of history have often kept Isaac's and Ishmael's descendants apart, Ishmael's legacy calls for a recognition of shared ancestry and the unifying faith that both groups trace back to the same spiritual roots. This shared heritage provides a pathway for healing and reconciliation, one that is founded on the understanding that their stories are not separate but interconnected in the larger tapestry of God's purpose for the world. The road to unity, however, requires more than just recognition. It demands a willingness to overcome centuries of distrust and hostility. Ishmael's descendants have long been seen as the other, often marginalized and misunderstood, while Isaac's line has been revered as the primary chosen people. Yet, within both religious traditions, there is a growing realization that the promises made to Abraham and his sons were never meant to create division, but to serve as a foundation for unity and peace. Ishmael's journey, from his early rejection to his eventual inclusion in the divine promise, is a reflection of this larger narrative. His story is not just one of personal redemption, but of the potential for unity between the two nations that descend from him and Isaac. In a world that continues to be divided by differences of faith, culture, and history, the call for unity remains more urgent than ever. The importance of Ishmael's legacy in bridging these divides cannot be overstated. His faith, his submission to God's will, and his unwavering belief in the promises made to him have the power to inspire future generations to seek common ground. Ishmael's story is one of reconciliation, first with his father, and later with his brother Isaac. It is a reminder that unity in faith and spirit can transcend even the deepest of historical divides. As his descendants continue to shape the world, the importance of embracing their shared heritage and fostering understanding between them grows ever more vital. In this spirit of reconciliation, there lies hope for a future where faith unites rather than divides, and where the legacy of Ishmael's journey can be fully realized. Ishmael's role in God's ultimate plan for humanity is often understated, yet it is integral to the unfolding of divine promises across generations. While much of the narrative tends to focus on Isaac and his descendants, Ishmael's story, too, is woven into the fabric of God's plan for the world. The connection between Ishmael's journey and the future fulfillment of God's promises stretches far beyond the immediate family dynamics. His life, marked by both separation and divine intervention, reveals a broader cosmic significance that echoes through time, shaping not only the trajectory of his descendants but also the spiritual heritage of the Abrahamic faiths. At the heart of Ishmael's story is the understanding that God's plan encompasses more than the immediate. His birth, though a result of human impatience and a momentary lapse in faith, was nevertheless part of the divine blueprint. God's promise to Hagar, Ishmael's mother, that her son would become the father of a great nation, was not a peripheral detail but a crucial part of the covenantal promise to Abraham. Ishmael's life, therefore, serves as a reminder that God's promises are expansive, reaching beyond one family or one line, touching all of humanity in ways not immediately understood. In this sense, Ishmael is a key player in the ultimate divine plan, whose legacy is far-reaching, touching not only his descendants but the entire spiritual narrative of the world. The future fulfillment of God's promises hinges on the recognition of all the branches of Abraham's family, not just one. Ishmael's line, while distinct from Isaac's, is equally part of the divine heritage. Through his descendants, God's covenant continues to unfold in ways that reflect a broad, inclusive understanding of God's work on earth. The Arab nations, who trace their ancestry to Ishmael, have played pivotal roles in the spread of faith, culture, and civilization. This global influence speaks to the cosmic importance of Ishmael, whose life, once marked by exile, now symbolizes the wide-reaching impact of God's plan for all people. In the broader biblical narrative, Ishmael represents more than just the son of Abraham. He embodies the tension between human choice and divine purpose. His separation from Isaac was not a failure of God's plan, but a moment of redirection, leading to the rise of a people whose spiritual journey would eventually find its place within God's grand design. Ishmael's role is part of the unfolding mystery of divine sovereignty, a story where every detail, even the difficult or painful ones, contributes to the ultimate redemption of all creation. His story, often seen as one of sidelined promise, in fact reveals the depth of God's vision for humanity, one where the faithful are gathered from every nation, and the promises made to Abraham are fulfilled in ways that surpass human understanding. As the years passed, Ishmael's life, though marked by trials, became a testimony to God's faithfulness and his promises. His journey, from the early days of his birth to his time in the wilderness, reflected the strength that comes from unwavering trust in a God who guides and protects. The struggles he faced, the separation from Isaac, and the distance from his father were never in vain. Instead, they shaped him into a figure of resilience, embodying the truth that God's plans often unfold in unexpected ways, but always with purpose. In his final days, Ishmael looked back with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that his life had played a crucial role in the divine narrative. While his story may have been overshadowed by Isaac's, the legacy he left behind was just as significant. His descendants, the Arab nations, would go on to become a powerful and influential people, carrying the faith, hope, and promises of God across generations and continents. His legacy, in many ways, became the bridge between the divine and the earthly, between faith and culture, between the past and the future. His life was a testament to the continuing unfolding of God's plan, and though his name may not have been as widely celebrated as Isaac's, his importance in the broader tapestry of God's kingdom was undeniable. Before his passing, Ishmael blessed his sons, passing on the promises that had been given to him. His words were not just blessings of material success, but also of spiritual inheritance. The faith that had guided him in his own journey was passed down, a legacy of hope that would continue to sustain his descendants. As he spoke to his children, his words were filled with the recognition that they were part of something greater, an ongoing story of redemption and divine purpose. Through his final blessing, Ishmael ensured that his descendants would carry forward the torch of faith, just as he had done. In his last moments, Ishmael's life stood as a symbol of enduring hope, faith, and spiritual continuity. He had lived through times of hardship, faced rejection and isolation, and yet remained steadfast in his belief in the promises of God. His story was not one of immediate recognition or acclaim, but it was one of quiet faith, and that faith would resonate through the generations. His life and his final blessing spoke of the timeless truth that God's promises are not bound by time or human expectation, but rather are part of a larger, eternal narrative. Ishmael's legacy was not just a blessing to his immediate family, but to all those who would come after, a reminder that even in moments of doubt and hardship, God's faithfulness endures.